YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, providing it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself so that anyone who intends to record the meeting can be made aware. Anyone so wishing? Okay. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, could members please speak as clearly as possible, keep background noises to a minimum, and ensure that your mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. We have some members of the committee joining us remotely today. I now ask them to confirm that they can hear and check that we can hear them. Councillor David Summers.
I can hear and see you.
Thank you. Councillor Jim Kenyon.
Yeah, I can hear and see you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Sam Pratley.
Yes, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Mr. Andy James.
Yes, I can see and hear you.
Any members of the committee are co-opted in voting rights who join the meeting remotely, just to remind you, are not able to vote in any resolutions of the committee, but may otherwise participate in the debate. I think only applies to Councillor Summers. Present in the room today, we have Councillor Dana Toynbee, Cabinet Member Children and Families. Welcome, Dana. Darryl Freeman, Interim Director of Children and Families. Matthew Sampson was going to be here again. Apologies. And we also have Claire Burgess of the Local Government Association. Nice to see you, Claire. We also have by remote attendance the Interim Head of Legal Services, Kate Charlton, as the lead advice to the committee. Can you see and hear everything okay, Kate?
Yes, I can see and hear you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other people online that I have omitted? I think I've covered everybody.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. Other attendees present, we were asked to introduce themselves as we come to their specific items. Apologies for absence. I believe you have none.
That's correct. So apologies.
Full complement, I think that's correct. Yes. One online. Name substitutes, there are no name substitutes for today. Any declarations of interest? Do any members wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interest in any of today's agenda items? Oh, thank you. Item 4, the minutes. This is to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on 7th of September. There are no matters of accuracy that have been notified. So can I ask for the minutes of the 7th of September approved, please? And voting members will raise their hands to indicate if there are 4. No one against, I don't think. No abstentions. That's carried. As we all know, you'll see there was a recommendation tracker at the end of the minutes, which we've introduced for this meeting, but we will be looking at that when we come on to work programme later. That's an innovation, so I'll make sure we don't lose recommendations that have been made, which are not necessarily firm actions going forward. Questions from the public. There was one question from the public. The question response has been published in a supplement to the agenda papers. I will ask the clerk to confirm any supplementary questions. There was going to be one which I could read out of that, but there are no others, are there?
No, I want to see that.
Okay. There was one lady who put forward a question to which we've answered, which hopefully you've all seen. She sent a message to say, would I read this out? So she's at work. I have been since 9 AM and don't have time to read and consider a written response. I haven't really got time to formulate and submit a supplementary question. Please ensure that the public meeting is made clear and recorded in the public record. I would have liked the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, but the response was sent late in the middle of a working day, and the delay has ensured that I do not have the time to consider and formulate a response, and I do not consider this a fair proper way of treating the public. The council service about this question since Wednesday. From what you say, this is only public mention you've had to write a response to. This isn't okay. It's quite clear to me that some parts of the council are still not keen to engage positively with the public, despite all the loud rhetoric about listening to victims and their families. She asked if I could read that out, which I've done. And the point is, there isn't actually really a definite deadline by which they should be published. Of course, ideally they should be earlier. And we have probably always to budget just get out, and we will ensure that we get opportunity to submit to council appropriately either between now and the next meeting or the next meeting, depending on which suits her best.
Chair, I'd like to make a recommendation, please. The recommendation is that we should refer to audit and governance to have a timescale by which a response needs to be given so that members of the public can respond to their response, because it doesn't give anybody time, and it sort of undermines the open door which we have offered to the public about listening to what's going on the ground. And I think it would serve this committee really well if we had a timescale set on that process so that it was clear for members of the public.
I certainly think that would be a question worth asking. It's worth noting that, of course, there is a timeline by which the question has to be submitted in the first place and a response given, but it's a supplementary that I think is questionable. And we allow the maximum possible time for people to get supplementaries in, but it does mean that sometimes it's so close that it's quite difficult to do that. But obviously, it would make sense to look into that a bit further to see if that is something we should be doing. Any other points to raise? Questions? I could just accept that you may have to go in the notes.
As a recommendation, I'm sure.
Any committee members who say anything to that? Would you agree that we put that recommendation in the notes of the meeting?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to ask for the vote for it, but just make sure you all agree that should be recorded. Okay, so the minutes have been passed. Questions from the public? There are no questions from members of the council. So we come on to the first main item on the agenda, with the provision of children centre services in the Bromyard area. And this is to consider proposals for the provision of the council's early help children's centre service for the Bromyard area from the 1st of April. You may remember we had a debate on committee about this last year, when it was meant to be brought in-house, and we felt that should be questioned. It was put to cabinet, and as a result, you'll note or heard that the contract has been extended to March. So, and then further beyond that for 2 years, subject to a tender. And that's what we're going to discuss now, those further steps. So first of all, I'd like to welcome those attending for this item. We have Councillor Alan Selden, board member for Bromyard West. Thank you very much, Alan.
Good afternoon.
I know Councillor Shaw is hoping to join us, board member for Bromyard and Brimsey. I know he's away and he probably can't, but we have got a statement to read out for him. We've also got online, I hope we've got Richard Watson. Are you there, Richard?
Yes, I'm here.
You can hear and see us.
I can hear and see you, yes.
Amanda Price, Children's Commissioning and Contract Lead.
Hello there. I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nicola Turvey, Head of Service Early Help.
Hello, yes. Nicola Turvey, I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. As I said, the committee scrutinised proposals relating to the children's services, essential services in Bromley in January, recommended the contract be extended for 12 months, and that was agreed to be extended to March 22. The report today considers proposals for provision of these services beyond that date. I'd like to begin by inviting President and officers to introduce the report, please. Who's going to do that?
So I can make a start if that's okay, Chair.
That's you, Richard, is it?
That's me, Richard. Yes, I don't know if you can see me. There I am.
Great. Thank you.
I'm suddenly very big.
And just to highlight your role, Richard, you are Children's Joint Commissioning Manager, is that correct?
Children's Commissioning Manager.
Okay, you are the manager.
Yeah.
It's joint here, but you have sole responsibility. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Would you like
Okay.
to introduce the report then?
Yeah. So hopefully members of the committee have had a chance to review the report. As the chair has just said, back in February, there was a decision to temporarily extend the contract that we had, which takes us up until March of next year. And we're now in a position where we need to decide what we do from the 1st of April. In the meantime, since that decision was made, there's obviously been quite a lot happening. There's been some new national policy guidance for supporting children in their early years, and the council has begun to implement its improvement programme for children's services more widely. So over the last few months, the landscape in which we've worked has changed somewhat, and it does bring around an opportunity for the council to look more strategically at its provision of children's centre services in all parts of the county, not just the Bromyard area. And as part of the improvement work, it's a chance to ensure that children and families of children in their early years can access the right help at the right time, achieve better outcomes, and help prevent the need for them entering some statutory services later on in life. The report does highlight that the last really comprehensive review of children's centre services in Herefordshire was getting on for a decade ago in 2012-13. There has been some early work done, which colleagues will be able to chip in on, around a new early years strategy, and it's expected that will be completed, I think, in the next year. And that should help inform what we need to do for children's centre services across the county in the long run. And through its Best Start for Life policy, the new national policy, the government does expect local areas to co-design services with parents and carers. So part of that work around the early years strategy will involve local consultation and engagement work as a core part of the work to deliver the early years strategy. And so that will be taking place across the county. So given the context and the environment that we're now working in, it's been proposed that we recommission the Bromyard service, and in order to comply with the council's procurement procedure rules, that would require us to go through a competitive procurement process. The value of the contract over the full 2 years would be around about £56,500, which falls into the medium category of the council's contract procedure rules, so would require us either to go down attracting at least 4 quotes, or going out in an open tender mechanism. So I think that's a very brief introduction to the proposals. We would be intending to go out to tender before Christmas and have that process completed before the end of January, so that the new service and the new contract could be in place in good order by the 1st of April. So I'm happy to take questions, or if there are any other officers that wanted to add anything to my introduction, then please feel free.
Thank you, Richard. What I'd like to do, if that's okay, members, is let's get all the reports and the people who speak representing the earlier centre, and then ask questions and refer all of those if you're agreeable to that. So I'd like to ask Councillor Alan Selden if you'd like to address the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. If I may beg your indulgence, Chair, I think the representation from Councillor Shaw should come before mine, if I may.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. In a context, obviously, we've got his report here. He was hoping to attend. He's asked if I could read out his report. He was not able to. Hopefully, you will all have seen it, but he wants it read out quite rightly. This is a statement from Councillor Nigel Shaw, ward member for Bromyard Brigstreet. Thank you to the Chair and Committee for receiving my comments. Reading the officer's report, I do note that the officers claim that there was interest expressed by other parties in providing this service when the contract was recently extended. The committee might wish to satisfy themselves that there is solid evidence for this statement. I also appreciate that this contract is likely to be estimated at around the 25 to 30k range. Given the commercial margins and overheads for such services, the committee might wish to know what scoring mechanism is proposed for the contract, and whether charitable institutions might be awarded funding to cover their costs in applying to such a tender. Otherwise, the tender is only likely to receive attention from an organisation seeking to take it on as a contribution to fixed overheads that would not best serve the authority's purposes. There is also a cost to the authority of tendering such a small contract. The committee might want to know what that is. I note the claim by Hope that none of the work that the scrutiny committee recommended in January has been done as far as I know, and there has been no involvement with us except one meeting in July, where a commissioning officer asked me what I hoped to get out of the meeting. So the actions and expectations that were scoped out have not been met during this year, and the recent troubles that have affected the Children's Services portfolio seem to be ongoing with the most recent developments. This doesn't sound as if the alignment of targets and method of working that had received much discussion previously has been effective through closer working and training, as I'd hoped. The committee might want to ask officers how they intend to rectify that situation, given the reported non-delivery of actions from the previous meeting. The committee might want to ask whether these have been identified in their own committee action tracker. In conclusion, the services provided by Hope have been widely praised, and other contracts have been won by them for related community support projects. Local staff who deliver these services are embedded in Hope, and how likely they will be to transfer is questionable. The services supplied to the children and families of the Bromhead area must surely come before any nicety of uniform delivery and contractual process. If there has been a failure to align Hope's KPIs, that's key performance indicators, for those who are not familiar with the acronym, with those of the changing focus of the council's children team, then we should take the responsibility for that. I see nothing in the report suggesting how we intend to improve our relationship with this provider and guide them towards alignment with the Herefordshire standard, assuming, of course, that is superior. So that's the statement from Councillor Shaw, and I have to say, I think we join in the disappointment that more hasn't been done. That was recommended from January, and it has been, and that's why we brought it forward to this committee to make sure we have to look at that and to consider what the current proposals are. Do you know, Phil, Councillor Sells,
Yes.
that you can make your own comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I couldn't put the words any better than Councillor Shaw, and in some ways he's far more eloquent than I in expressing the disappointment of some of the outcomes from the January the 19th meeting. I would encourage the committee to ask our officers how recommissioning this work in this way will be an advantage to the young families and the people of Bromhead. Because what I see from the report, it seems to be more focused on process and interpreting government policy than it is actually delivering a service to the people that need it. And another thing that's missing from the report, in my view, is the added value that the Hope Centre brings to the contract. And the current £25,000, if I've got my figures correct, Chair, is that it pays for one member of staff to do 1.5 days work per week. Now, if that's all the Hope Centre does, and that's all that was going on, then you'd be up to your armpits in serious case reviews. And I think that the lack of research that's been done, and I think the chief executive of the Hope Centre said to me the other day, we've had one meeting since the January meeting, at which I think Councillor Shaw said, where these commissioning officers are, well, what do you want out of this meeting? So the history of relationships between the provider and our commissioning teams is still fraught after all the things I said in January. And it seems that all I said in January still holds true. That we are more concerned about process and interpreting government policy than we are about delivering services to the children and young people of Bromhead. Now, if it could be shown to this committee and to me that what is being proposed would improve what's there already, bearing in mind what I've said about the added value of the contract and the work that the people at the Hope Centre do, I would be all encouraging you to go ahead and re-examining the contract, but I don't think you have all the information required to make that kind of judgment on making a recommendation to the cabinet member for carrying this forward. And I really do think this report is extremely thin on the ground on that kind of detail. And I'll leave it there, Chair, for now, if I may. I think the committee should ask the kind of questions that Councillor Shaw has encouraged you, and I'm sure you have questions of your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Selden. I agree that there are quite a few questions that Councillor Shaw's raised, which are obviously sensible, which I think we should be getting answered. One of the reasons we're putting on the programme today. So I would like to invite other members now to make any comments, ask any questions that they may have. One thing I'd like to ask first is, we mentioned KPIs a lot, Councillor Shaw's done that. So as a starter, what are the key performance indicators that we will be looking to? Are they published? Are they available? I think that is something that, as a start, we ought to see. And why haven't we got them? Yeah, so I don't know whether you might be able to answer that. Is that something we can see as a matter of urgency, what the KPIs would be in a tendering process that people would have to?
Okay, so yeah, so the KPIs are set out within the service specification that sits behind the contract, and normally that service specification is published as part of the tender process. So it is something that can be shared. It's not something that I have ready to hand. So we can, if the committee is happy, we can provide the key performance indicators in writing outside of the meeting. Just to pick up on one of the points there has been quite a lot of work done with the provider through our normal contract management meetings. I don't know if Amanda wants to chip in there, just to make sure that the key performance indicators are aligned with what is happening with other children's centres that are operated by the council. Chair, would the committee want to hear about the work that has been done?
I think we would, yes. And you're offered to send those out after this meeting. I'm sure every member would agree. It would be good to see those.
Okay, so could I just ask Amanda just to say a little bit about what has been done with the provider since the contract was issued for the last 12 months?
Yeah.
Then we can ask questions further. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So since the decision was made regarding the extension to the contract prior to March last year, we undertook a number of exercises alongside the provider and with the Children's Centre Services Manager delivering the in-house service to make sure that there was clear alignment with the key performance indicators for the in-house service and also for Bromyard service. So the new specification that covers this current financial year is clearly aligned alongside that. And I would just like to add that it is, although we do have obviously regular contact with the providers, it's normal procedure that we would have quarterly contract management meetings. Obviously, we would have only had one of those meetings since the start of the contract in April, but we have had email correspondence in between just to ensure that that is everything that's been put in place is working as smoothly as it can.
We're saying that all the direct centres have their own measure of KPIs which can be compared to Bromyard. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right. So all of the Children's Centre service provision report on their progress. I believe in-house services report on a monthly basis, but are actually reported on a quarterly basis. And all of the reporting measures are equal to those that are recorded for Bromyard.
I think the committee probably agree it would be good if we had that evidence before now. I think it would be really useful to get that. Could I ask how many early start centres there, how many early help centres there are altogether?
If I could ask Nikki to come in there and just explain how the Children's Centre services work, because there is a distinction between buildings and services.
Yes, Nicola Turvey speaking. Head of Early Help. It's a children's centred service. It's not based on buildings. That has been for several years now, since the council took the decision to rationalise buildings. So the in-house service covers the whole of the rest of Herefordshire, and we deliver the service where the need is. So if we have more families identified needing targeted support, then more provision goes to those families. The vast majority of our work is targeted. It is in family homes or in community settings, and we also do deliver a universal provision in each of the main areas where there isn't some community provision already available. So, for example, in Ledbury, there are Friends of Ledbury, and they deliver that universal provision. In other areas, we do it ourselves. So it's very much services are delivered where the needs are. So, for example, if we know there are areas of deprivation where more families have been identified by partner agencies. Our main partner is our health visitors and early years providers. Then that's where our workers will go out and do that individual work with families.
Okay, that helps. I'll open to some questions. So committee, Councillor Healy first, then Councillor Andrews, then Councillor Selden, I think, were next.
There's a trouble for the committee, and that is that the things that you're talking about, they haven't got sight of. So performance indicators probably are related to deprivation levels as to where you put the service, but we can't see what the historical impact of the Bromyard Hope Centre has been, because we don't have a history here. We don't have a before the service was implemented, and there was obviously need at that time. Then an impact assessment as to how that service has actually changed the profile of children's outcomes in the Bromyard area, and what would happen if you removed it, because if we're always following in a reactive way with children's services and not basically saying, well, we have a service that's working well here, it's embedded in the community, it's done its work, it's doing its work. If we remove it, what would happen? So some of the evidence that you're talking about, I mean, I refer to our previous incumbents' heat maps. Heat maps would show us, what over the course of time happened in a community when a provision was put, what happened when it's taken away, and what we need to do, not to react to varying levels of deprivation as they go on annually, but to embed something, which it strikes me from testimonies that I have heard, and obviously they're not in this report, and the Hope Centre aren't allowed to come and give testimony, which is a bit poor, it has provided good service to the local community. So I have a variety of questions. One is, please give us more evidence. But the other one is that, can we please understand, what would happen if we took this away? It's, sorry, I lost my thread a bit at the end there, but you understand the general drift of what I'm saying. I don't see how this committee can make much of an analysis when it hasn't got the information to analyse. So there you go.
Thank you, Councillor.
Can I respond there, Chair, while it's fresh in my mind?
Yeah, okay, that probably seems a sensible thing to do. Yes, is that
Okay.
okay?
Yeah, so there was a lot in there, and I'll try and cover as much as I can. First of all, there's no proposal to remove the service. What we're proposing to do is continue the service for another 2 years. We are bound by the council's procurement rules, which are approved by Audit and Governance Committee, and they require us, because of the value of the contract, to run a competitive tender process. So we're not planning to change the service, but we are required to go through a process before we can award a new contract. Just on the point of heat maps, I agree with that completely. And it would be something that would be really helpful to us as commissioners through the strategic work that's going to be undertaken next. Well, it is already started, but will be undertaken in the next year around the early help strategy to actually help inform how children's centre services across the county need to be possibly redesigned, reshaped, whatever that might look like. But understanding what works is absolutely a key that we would like to have in our commissioning intentions. I hope I've covered a couple of points there.
Thank you. Perhaps a few more questions might come back to that, but Councillor Andrews, you would like to ask a question?
I think you answered a few there, Richard. Thank you. I'm going to agree with Jenny on here, Councillor here on this to begin with. Initially, we're getting a bit of a mess of what we're trying to understand here because we don't have the details in front of us. But to work on Councillor Shaw's original questions, he asked two questions. One was about the tendering process or what is going to be the targets for tendering. And whilst you've answered it as being it's going to be the governance and follow what the governance tells you, which is great, it follows the company. We don't know it. So what are the goals that's going to be under this tendering that you're going to get these companies to quote for? And how do we know that's what we want and who's agreeing to that? And how do we know that they're delivering a fantastic service? If that's the benchmark for it, then we probably need to tell the other people tendering that's the benchmark and see what else they can offer. So I think we need to be careful as a committee also. There's a difference between your tendering documents of what you're asking somebody to tender for and what KPIs are. KPIs are different. They come within the tendering process of what you expect it to do. And again, we don't have those information from the current service providers to say if they're high performers, average performers, or they're no performers. So again, it makes it very difficult to give you a good answer in this committee for what you're currently putting on the table for us, to be honest.
But we've got a promise now we will get those KPIs and the comparison to television correct after this meeting. So we'll have that to look at.
And I will say, Chair, again, it's like using my common thread about pace and urgency of it. If you're going to put these tenders out at the end of the year to be tendered, to be awarded in January, and then to be in place for early, then they've got to be done really quickly. We cannot wait for another scrutiny meeting just to do a cycle of meetings to come back on the front. It needs to happen now. And the preparation for this item is not good enough.
Quite agree. I'm really looking forward to this meeting because time is very short to get this done.
So
to investigate.
So I should have known something going.
No, quite agree with you, Councillor Selden. You want to
Thank you, Chair. I don't mean to interrupt and take too much of the committee's time, but as a suggestion, you may want to inquire what the key performance indicators refer to, because as I understand it, some of them are more to do with the social care aspect rather than the preventative work that goes on at the moment. And that's what concerns me the most about this, because if you remove a plank of preventative work that's going on at the moment without something that's proven to work to replace it, you've got a problem.
quite agree. And one of the key things about early years, it's the 1 to 5, not to 5, the first 1,001 days of the say, which completely influence how people turn out in later life. So the elements of prevention, that means people don't come back to services later, is pretty critical.
But also, key performance indicators tend to measure things that are already entering into the system.
Take your point entirely. Councillor Anson, you had a question next.
No, sorry, thank you. Coming late to this, I'm slightly struggling with the whole thing. Can I just very quickly ask, why can't Hope come and give testimony to this committee? And also, can you clarify Friends of Ledbury, please?
Let's ask Richard. I think you can probably answer both of those.
I'm sorry, the audio is not brilliant. I didn't catch the questions.
There were two questions. One, why can't Hope come and give testimony to this committee? I'm assuming there isn't a reason. We can ask them to. And the second one, can you clarify what Friends of Ledbury means in the context that you talked about it?
Okay, so the question about Hope attending the committee, I think I would have to hand over to Sarah Buffery or somebody from Governance Services. That's not something I've been involved in, so I don't know the answer to that. And I'll ask Amanda just to, Nikki, Nikki knows about the Friends of Ledbury.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Nikki Tovey speaking. Just wanted to clarify one thing. Children's Centre Services delivers services to all levels of need. So that is preventative right up to families whose children are on child protection plans. So because, you know, so for 0 to 5, it could be family on any level of need, on Herefordshire's levels of need. The Friends of Ledbury is a charitable organisation.
Okay, set up in Ledbury.
Yes, set up in Ledbury.
And it's completely separate to any other organisation, not through Talk Community or anything like that. It's a completely separate organisation, is it?
I'm not sure if it's linked to Talk Communities. It's an organisation that was set up to sort of do that universal provision for families with children 0 to 5.
Sounds like something we should know a little more about as a committee. Okay, well, it wasn't one we were aware of. Councillor Answer, myself, both from Ledbury, and neither of us heard of it before, so it would be quite good to find out a little bit more. If you've got any more, tell us, or a contact. I think that would be really helpful for us. Councillor Payne, you were next.
Yeah, thank you. Given the level of detail in the report, I have quite a few questions, but I'll try and trim them down. One of the things I would like to find out is sort of what is the evidence of how will this advantage this process? How will this advantage the young people and families in Bromyard? Second of all, what would be the cost of the tendering process for the council? And then thirdly, I'm finding it very difficult because I feel like we have a service that is working well in Bromyard, that is serving children and families well in Bromyard, and at a very unstable time in Herefordshire, to sort of throw in a sort of destabilising process feels like a regressive step. Sorry, but on page 16, it says that the direct award of the new contract, one of the options is directly awarding the new contract to the incumbent provider. And it says that market testing was undertaken in 2018. 2018 is quite a long time ago. A lot of things have changed since 2018. And I'd like to know, has any market testing sort of indicated that there are other organisations that would be wishing to sort of put in a tender for this? Because what this report is saying is that it's using that as the justification to not seek an exemption from the council's standing procurement rules. And I feel like we have a situation here which provides a perfect reason to seek exemption from the standing procurement rules. We have children's services in complete disarray. We have a complete breakdown in trust in the service, and yet here we have a service which is actually through partnership with a different organisation is actually providing something stable in the county. That to me seems like a very good reason to seek exemption.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And that's the question Councillor Shaw asked about the cost of tendering. Yeah. And I'm sure in the Constitution there are guidelines about when it is acceptable not to go to competitive tender. And certainly this would be a case, I agree that we should look and say, are there good reasons why in this case that wouldn't apply? So I don't think we should automatically assume we should go to competitive tender, which is what you're saying. And I think people probably all agree with that. Councillor Hewitt.
Well, thank you, Councillor Fagan. That was a really well made point. And to follow on from that, what I don't really understand is, are they failing on their key performance indicators? We don't have any information about that. And if they're not failing, if it's not broken, why are we trying to fix it? So.
Do you want to respond to that, Richard, and your team?
Just trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, there's been a few questions, so I'll try and cover a few if I may. Firstly, in terms of the benefit for the people of Bromyard, any competitive exercise is intended to try and find the best provider to deliver the service. That's no reflection on the current provider at all, but it is to go through an open and transparent process to make sure that we are getting the best for our service users. In terms of the cost of running an exercise, most of the cost, frankly, is in the work that leads up to it in terms of governance, preparing contract documents, all sorts of things, and they are needed regardless of whether we go out to tender or do a direct award. The bit that's different with going out to tender is a little bit like doing a job interview. So you have to advertise it. We do that through the council's portal. You then have your applications come in, you have a panel look at those applications and spend a little bit of time looking at those applications and coming to a recommendation. So actually, on top of all of the work that we have to do anyway, the procurement bit of the process isn't that in depth. It's it would be great if we didn't have to do it because we have a lot of other work to do, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge pressure. There was also a question about exemptions, and it's not a case that we've just assumed that we should go out to tender. When we're looking at making recommendations, we obviously refer back to the council's approved procurement rules, and they do make it clear the circumstances in which you'd be required to go out to tender or seek quotes, and they also give some guidance on when exemptions from the contract procedure rules might be considered, and the sorts of things that they talk about are where there's extreme urgency. So we have had some examples over the past year or so resulting out of COVID or the improvement programme where there has been an extreme urgency, and we have received an exemption from procurement rules, or where there's an absence of competition in the market, i.e. there are no other providers that could deliver this service, and we do know that there are other providers either locally or nationally that would be qualified. Whether they would be interested is the whole point of running the tender, really, to see what the interest is and attract their bids for the work. I hope I've covered a few of those questions.
Pretty well. Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, thank you. Also, following on from that, has any consultation actually been done with the users of the service in Bromyard?
As I said, the intention is that through the work to develop the early years strategies, that there will be quite a lot of community engagement and consultation, which will include Bromyard and other areas. As we're not proposing to change the service, we haven't done a specific consultation with the users of this service, and it would be quite unusual for a contract of this value at this stage if no significant changes are being proposed.
Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to agree with the earlier comments about the KPIs, the lack of them. But you've got to be wary of them, that we're just going to produce those now. And given the figures and what's happening in children's services overall, we've been told the wrong things anyway over the last couple of years, that things were better than they actually were and improving. But to my mind at the moment, that isn't happening. But what I would say with this, so I wholeheartedly say we should back this, because they're representing, we haven't, if there's been problems, you'd be having complaints, and whether they're recorded or not, and that would have come through. But when the service is running cheaper than the at £62 per child, as against 69 with the in-house service, and it is doing a good job, and I question whether we should be even, it needs to stay in-house, and question that we should be looking elsewhere. And we talk about with social services continuity, and why risk that going to another provider that isn't going to provide that? You need the people that have been there, that people get used to, that can talk and build a relationship. Why risk that? And I quote my comment in and what Jenny did earlier. Why fix it if it's not broken?
Yeah, good point. In point 23 of the report, it says exactly that. The cost per known child is £62 in Bromyard and 69 in the rest of Herefordshire. So, very good question to ask. How can you prove that benefit if they're known to be doing a really good job? Councillor Hewitt, I think you want to ask something else.
You've got some captures online as well. I want to ask questions.
Yes, sorry, I did see the hand. I'm not quite sure. It's first, Councillor Kenyon. Sorry, I didn't notice your hand. I was looking.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened intently. A couple of things I just like to make. It's something that we need to do, and it's only right and profit if you make sure that we get value for money. And I've just heard you that one of my questions was going to be. I've just heard you think you said it as a throwaway comment. The cost per family or per outcome as compared to the rest of Herefordshire. I have accessed Bromyard services some time ago, and I used it and I find it to be fantastic. So value for money is what we've got to be talking about here. Okay, it's value for money and the service given. Now, I understand the service given is of top quality. Is it outstanding or somewhere near that? Richard, can you answer that for me?
So we do need to make a distinction between the all of the other services that are provided by the incumbent provider, Hope Family Centre. They will have an Ofsted rating.
Yeah.
The service that is provided by this contract doesn't fall under that rating, so it doesn't apply.
Okay. But it's surrounded by outstanding performing facility. Okay. So value for money. That's the question then. How many cases per annum? So what cost is it per family or per outcome? I'd be interested to know that. Because if they're doing particularly well, we need to know, and if they're doing particularly poor, we need to know. But I'm very much of the opinion that what we don't want to do is put all our eggs in one basket. If we've got something that's working and working well, leave it alone. Of course, we've got to check it, but those are the things. At the service level, how many people are accessing that service, and the value for money side of things. So they're my questions going forward.
Now, item 23, Councillor Kenyon, does say that not how many families, but it does talk about that's 403 children, known children in Bromyard compared to 8,151 in the rest of Herefordshire. So you probably extrapolate for 403 how many families it might be.
Could I just clarify that point? So that part of the report talks about the amount of resource that the council allocates, which is different to what it might cost. It's a subtle thing, but we have done work previously on what it costs, and we would intend to update that as part of any future proposals falling out of the early years strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Patley. You had your hand up as well for some time. Sorry, I missed you there. Take your point, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just quickly, I certainly agree with all of the comments about the lack of quality and impact information that's contained in the report. Also, the lack of context which is set, and Councillor Kenyon was just drawing some of that out. The Hope Family Centre spends over £500,000, which suggests that the small amount that the local authority gives it acts as quite a lever to a lot of other income for that Hope Family Centre. And I think it's important that we see it within the whole context of the whole thing. My question is more to Richard. You said that this was a medium-sized procurement project. So we're talking about £56,000 over 2 years, which is £28,000 a year, which is less than a full-time employee. are audit and risk absolutely convinced that you're procuring projects at the right sort of level? Because whilst I accept that you said that there was little pressure on you and the service for procuring, it places a huge burden on an organisation to jump through the hoops of doing a tendering process to fund less than a full-time employee, when it's in context of their overall business, a relatively small proportion. And I just wonder whether you've got that proportion right, and whether you could be a little bit more willing to work in partnership with the voluntary sector to say, for these sorts of amounts of money, with this sort of benefit that you're bringing, we can be a little bit more able to say, yes, we'll give you that little bit of funding on the basis that you lever in significantly more money.
So in terms of the medium categorisation, that is set out in our council's procurement rules, which, as I mentioned before, have been approved by Audit and Governance Committee. So they're the rules that we are given to work to, and the banding off the top of my head, so please don't quote me on this. I think if it falls between a £25,000 and £75,000 value, it's categorised as medium, and that requires either 4 quotes or a full tender. If it's above 75,000, then it's a higher value, and that definitely requires a high value. It might be helpful if the committee wished to have some information on the council's procurement rules, and maybe somebody from commercial services could come along and share that with the committee, because this is the framework that we apply to all of our contracts. It's not specific to the Bromyard one.
Thank you. I just wrote down, Richard, yes, procurement rules, tendering information to the committee. I think that will be useful to see. So I think Mr. Patrick making a point we'd all agree with. It does seem quite a small sum of money for the effort involved and the cost to those tendering. Councillor Selden.
Yes, thank you, Jack. I see Kate Charlton's on the call. Kate, would it be possible for you to clarify through the Constitution what the procurement rules set out in the Constitution specify?
Kate, if you heard that.
Richard did quote the right sum in terms of the medium, what the medium value of contracts is for re-tendering. I can quote them now if that would help.
I think it'd be good to have a recap. Yes, please. Would the committee agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yes, please, Kate.
Yeah. So it's the low value is a contract below 25,000. A medium value is a contract between 25,000 and a penny to 75,000. And a high value is 75,000 to 189,000 where it's goods and services, 4 million where it's works, and 663,000 for a light touch health and social care services. And then we go into UK compliant procedures for tendering for contracts over that value. So what I can arrange to do is I'll arrange to forward these contract procedure rules as part of the Constitution to all committee members.
Thank you. That would be useful. Councillor Fagan.
I was just wondering if you could talk us through the exemption rules, please.
Yes, bear with me. I'll just find those on the Constitution. So the current contract exemptions are where you're where there's they are as Richard has said, where we've got a contract that is seeking an exemption because there are legitimate reasons as to why it can't be extended, that you need to give it a short contract or give it to another provider on a short contract. That might be because the contract, there hasn't been enough contract planning and the contract is coming to an end. And then the other reasons relate to they're relating to contract, it's outside the contract framework, or it's outside in terms of excess of the market price. It doesn't unfortunately take into account those comments I've heard from members and concerns I've heard from members this afternoon about if something is, if the service is fitting right at the moment, why are we looking to do something different? It talks about actually an emergency situation for needing to do a contract waiver.
So the key question to ask, I guess, is, given that we've only got 6 months before some decision is taken who carries on from March next year, would the guidelines allow for an exemption in this case for continuation of the contract until a lot more questions are answered, a lot more evidence is gathered, so we can put together a proper tendering process? Because it seems to most of us here that 6 months isn't long enough to do that. What would your view be on that, or is that something you'd have to come back with a formal answer for?
I'd like to come back with a formal answer on that, so that we could carefully consider what the exemptions are and what the statutory provisions are as well. And we'll provide you with a written answer if that's okay, please, Chair.
No, please, I think we'd like that information, and that's something I think we'll include in our recommendations. Councillor Fagan.
Thank you, Chair. It's just that the on page 21, the risk management, the top risk is that given the potential challenges of the coronavirus pandemic, which we have seen exemptions within procurement because of the pandemic. So it says, given the challenges of the pandemic, adaptations to service delivery may cause disruption and negatively impact vulnerable families. But that sounds like a huge risk, and actually exactly what we're trying to stop in Herefordshire. So this does seem to me like potentially an emergent, reasons for an emergency reconsideration of those rules.
I think the promise we've got for the exemption rules to come back, and then we can ask that question to legal, is exactly the point you're making. Yeah, well made. Councillor Hewitt. Oh, sorry, I think Councillor Summers had his hand up first.
Councillor Summers.
Councillor Summers.
Chair, new early years, it's changed considerably in the last 3 years. We have different age groups now than what we've had in the past. I'm not sure how up we are on that. I would like to know what partners and providers are involved and what has to come together in that contract, because we seem to be very poor at bringing things together. I know in the mental health field it's so sporadic, it's so broken up and jaded that we really don't know what's going on half the time. So, and I think maybe the same thing with early years. There's such a wide array of different groups that are involved in this, and I would like to see some. If we're going to put somebody up to tender, that they're qualified enough to bring these groups together. Now, I'd like to see the council do it. I've already suggested that, but we really need to bring these things together in one place, so we have something that we can chase up, that we can figure out what's going on all the time, rather than go to 10 different people and ask them the same question 10 different times. So I think I would like to see a list of partners and providers that are in early years, because there are quite a few. That includes schools, etc., and CAMS and perinatal. So there's quite a few there that we need to bring together, and whoever we put in charge of that, they need to be capable of doing that. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Councillor. I think Councillor Self, did you have your hand up a while ago?
No, fine. I think I've made all the points I need to, and Councillor Fagan's made one I was going to make about the COVID regulations.
Thank you. Just wanted to check. Councillor Hewitt, I think you had your hand up again.
Yeah, forgive me if some of this is because I don't understand stuff. So the first thing is, I've got a series of questions. I think if we take them one at a time, that would be really helpful for me. Are we considering this contract because the term of the original contract has expired, or because, and this is two things in one, and I didn't have an answer to this, are they failing on their key performance indicators? So there's two questions immediately, and then I'll follow up with the others, please.
So the reason this is coming up now is because the contract comes to an end in March next year. So and there's no option within the contract itself to extend it any further. If it were to be extended, for example, for the 2 years that's proposed, that would double the contract value, the original contract value, which would increase the risk of challenge from other potential providers. So the reason for doing this is because we are at the end of a contract and we need to put a new contract into place. There's no other reason than that.
Further questions, Councillor?
Yeah, so Councillor Fagan raised the issue of risk, and I think there's risk to many families, both those who are employed currently in the Hope Centre and provision and the trajectory of their careers, which they have considered. And there's risk to the service users. And since we haven't had an answer to a question about whether they're meeting their key performance indicators, and that goes back to a previous thing which both Councillor Ianson and I were going, I don't understand what the difference between, there's a distinction between the Ofsted evidence and the contract and value for money. I don't really see, I mean, I would have thought the contract is there to make a service provision, and if Ofsted is saying that the service provision is good, I don't understand how you can distinguish between those two things. That left me really confused. So I'd like an answer to that.
If I could bring in my colleagues there, if I can ask Amanda, Amanda is the contract manager, so if you could just reflect on the performance of the service since April, Amanda, and Nikki, if you could just talk a little bit about what the Ofsted registration is, what is it that's registered, and how is that different from this service? I think that might help the committee. So Amanda.
Yes, thank you, Richard. So as I mentioned earlier, the current contract has only been in place since April of this year. So we are very early days. We're due to have another contract management meeting actually this month. But all indications to date are that there are no concerns with regard to the performance of the service. So we have no concerns about them meeting the requirements of the contract to date.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions?
And it's Nicola Turvey, Chair. Would you like me to answer about the Ofsted?
Yes, thank you.
In Bromyard, they're also in the Hope Centre, not the Children's Centre. There's an early years provider, so a nursery provision, and that is what is Ofsted inspected. That's nothing to do with Children's Centre services. Children's Centre services used to be Ofsted inspected, but this was suspended in 2015 when the ring fencing of the money for Sure Start children's centres was stopped. So the money coming into local authority was reduced, and it was no longer ring fenced, and that's when Ofsted inspection as children's centre services ended. And there is no inspection of the service at the moment, but obviously some of it would feed into when the council is inspected for social care and early help, because some of those families that children's centre services work with would be within that remit, and one of those cases where a children's centre service was involved could be selected for being looked at by Ofsted.
That raises another question.
Yeah.
I don't understand the differences between children's centre services and early years support.
Children's centre services is a specific service, and in Herefordshire it's targeted to our most vulnerable families. Nursery education provision is like nurseries, so they have a provision in at the Hope Centre, and like some are attached to schools, some are also private businesses, and that's totally separate.
So they are earlier support.
It's nursery education.
Okay, so that provides earlier support as opposed to children's centre services, which is looking after those more in need.
Yeah, I mean, it's nursery education, which is funded by the government, and parents pay for it, and we have vulnerable families have the nursery education funding, but it is totally separate. It's education.
So both of these things happen at the Hope Centre, that's what you're telling us?
Well, there's a Hope Centre and there's a Children's Centre building as well, but we're not talking about buildings, we're talking about a service. And the majority of that service is taken out to vulnerable families in their family home. And that's for families who are on level 2, 3 or 4 on the Herefordshire levels of need. And as a service, we do also deliver universal provision. So that's like group works. Groups are for anybody in localities around the county where there isn't, as I said before, where there isn't, for example, a charitable organisation already delivering that.
You're saying those aren't Ofsted rated, but services be provided by third-party organisations such as nurseries are?
Yes, nurseries are. Children's centre services are no longer Ofsted inspected.
Who monitors those then? Are they done internally?
Pardon, sorry, I missed that.
So who monitors those if they aren't independently audited by something like Ofsted? Who monitors the provision of the children's services?
Well, it will come under the early years strategy, which we're really lucky in Herefordshire. We put a bid in to have support from the local government association to have some professionals supporting us completing our early years strategy. And within that strategy, it joins together, like I think Councillor Summers was mentioned, it joins together the key partners in providing everything for those early years. So that is health, education and support services. So the early years strategy has been jointly led by myself and public health, and because public health are commission health visitors in Herefordshire. So, and that will be partners will work together to draw up the strategy for early years within Herefordshire, and then on that, then we will write a service specification for children's centre services based on that strategy, and we plan to get the strategy written by the end of March 2022, and then that will be what we then look at reviewing what's delivered by children's centre services within Herefordshire.
Thank you. There's 3 more questions. Councillor Hanson, Councillor Selden, and then Councillor Kenyon, and then Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Hanson.
Yes, where can we find the statistics for the vulnerable families across Herefordshire? And also, why not until March for the
strategy?
Yeah.
Do I answer that now?
Yes, the strategy, as you can imagine, we will get partners together, and we've got this support from the local government association, so we're very lucky. But also in that, there's a lot of consultation with families as part of that. What do they want for their early years in Herefordshire? So with that, I'm afraid that will take time.
I think it's a very good question, because I've noted down here, I think Bromyard is just a case study for us to look at the whole provision of early years, I believe. And we should be saying, not only are we looking at Bromyard, but then looking further, the whole strategy providing early years support, and to look at the direct versus the integrated option. Because I think there's a lot more questions to be answered about what the best route is, and whether it's still a combination of a hybrid system or drawn in-house or directly outsourced. So I think there's a lot questions still that we need to know. And I'm sure committee members would agree we can have an input into that strategy. I think we should have. Councillor Selden.
Thank you, Chair. It's difficult for you to make any recommendations that are going to be truly meaningful without having the input from representatives of the Hope Centre to be able to come and speak to you. I would therefore invite you on my behalf to come and visit the Hope Centre and meet the staff there so that they can give you their first-hand experiences of the preventative work they do, which isn't measured by KPIs, and the other range of services, including the nursery provision, which I believe is outstanding. Ofsted think it's only good, but I believe it's outstanding because I'm biased. But I think it would probably help you formulate your recommendations going forward if you visited. And I would also say, as Diana has already found out, the coffee is very good.
That's a really good point. In fact, I've asked the question about going to visit Hope Centre, exactly as you say. And I was sort of really discouraged by that because of the reason it's still under review. But I either go to see them and or getting them to provide testing to our committee.
But if I may, Chair, the contract you're discussing is a very, very small part of what the Hope Centre does. The problem I have with it is not the size of the contract, it's the implication that by retendering to a provider that may not be as good as the Hope Centre, and I would hope that the tendering process would sort that out, but for you to be able to understand any recommendations coming from the commissioning team for the recommissioning of that service, I think you need to see what's there already.
I think we all agree with that. We need to find a way of doing it. Thank you for reinforcing that point. Councillor Kenyon, you had your hand up for a while. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've just got a question. I'm sitting here intently listening, and the Hope Centre, yeah, fantastic. I don't think there's an issue with it, but my issue is, why is it actually at scrutiny now? Because there's a process that Richard's is representing the council is going to take it through. They'll make a decision. Certainly, surely the time to scrutinise would be when that decision's made and not now. So are we not getting ahead of ourselves, or are we not giving ourselves business that we don't necessarily need to be getting involved in? That's my question to you, Chairman.
The answer to that is that there were some recommendations that were made when we last looked at it in January that would come back to this committee, and they haven't been, which is why we put it back onto the agenda. I think all the questions asked, there are still some questions we'd like answers to that would help us inform whether we should get more involved and not for a start. We'll come to the recommendation shortly, and that will be one amongst them.
Could I come in there, Chair, as well? Sorry, I can't see how to put my hand up on Zoom, but yes, it is Richard.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Councillor Kenyon, for raising those issues. I think normally we wouldn't have so much involvement from scrutiny in terms of a contractual and a commercial arrangement. We would follow the rules as set out by the council, and then we would go out to tender. There would be a transparent process to identify the normal provider or the most suitable provider, and then a decision would be taken to award a contract. I do think we need to be careful about the committee becoming too involved in deciding which provider might deliver any service, not just this service. So I just wanted to raise that if I could.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think it's a good point to make us aware of the difference between scrutinise how the process happens and who the individual providers are. I think we're fully conscious of that. But you're right. We always need to be aware of the barriers. Thank you. Councillor, your hand up.
Yeah, well, I don't think that was the intention of the committee, because I don't think you haven't mentioned another potential provider, and we haven't come up with any names either, and neither have we met anybody in the Hope Centre, so I don't think we can be sort of, well, I don't think you were accusing us, but I think the suggestion wasn't necessary. But I think would have been really helpful for me anyway, and I don't know whether other committee members feel this, is a map of actually what we're considering here. What does the Hope Centre do? What parts of it fall under whose remit or whose jurisdiction? Because I'm actually left a little bit confused as to how we assess what level of provision is being given by the money which the council spends, and how that money is being amplified by the current incumbents because they're bringing in other money from elsewhere, and how many employees we might be affecting by turfing all that lot out and getting a new lot in. And we don't have a clear cost analysis of how much it would cost to do all that anyway. So I'm really at a bit of a loss, and I want to go back to the first point that we don't have enough information here to make any real decisions. And now the time is very short. This has been presented to us, and you've got till, and that was the other point, that the strategy for early help or early years, it was early help, early years is going to be there by end of March 2022. And this doesn't keep pace with when this contract is going to end. So anybody that you're asking to tender cannot be tendering on the basis of the new programme, because they won't have any evidence about that. They won't have any performance evidence about how they would manage the new structure. And so I think that is a risk factor in itself, to sort of say, oh, we'll go with someone new, but we've got no idea whether they'll be able to manage this new strategy. And I just feel that we should look at the exemption process for all the risk factors that we've identified.
We'll obviously come back to some recommendations in a few minutes. I think we've had a really good debate. We've got quite a few recommendations. I'm sure we're going to ask Sarah to know. Before we do, I'd just like to ask if Councillor Townman, I know you're on the list as the Cabinet member, Darrell as the Director of Service, whether you've got any comments to make before we put our recommendations
Just
together?
a few, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this has been a very long saga, hasn't it, this issue? And I really feel for everybody concerned, that you as a committee, the officers and everybody at Hope, and I've had quite a lot of conversations about it. I think a while ago you got to the crux of what what we're here for, which is about the decision, and it really boils down to could we extend the current arrangement if we wanted to, or would our own rules not allow it? Which raises the point about exemption, which we're talking about. Does it meet exemption criteria, whether they're urgency or COVID or whatever? So that's really the crux of what we're here talking about. I also just wanted to say on the broader thing about strategy. Firstly, let's not get mixed up between early help and early years. I know it's a really complicated picture. It is. And I agree with Councillor Selden, prevention is absolutely essential. And, I think Hope is a really good example of that. It is difficult for officers when, they're under pressure for everything to be aligned. And, we're still putting together a strategy and everything's in flux. So it is a difficult situation. And, children's centres, we hear that phrase and we think that's an actual place, but it isn't. It's a service. So it's really difficult to understand. And Darrell and I are going to make sure that the whole picture is made a lot clearer. Thank you.
Thank you. Darrell, did you want to add any other points?
Thank you, Chair. Only this is answering the more recent question. This is a pre-decision scrutiny. I welcome the contributions that members and officers have made to the conversation this afternoon, as reiterating Councillor Toynbee's point. There are options available, which you've talked about in terms of exemptions or other alternatives, and your feedback today will be fed into that next stage of the process.
Thank you.
I think as an observation too, I recognise some of the challenges that have arisen from this paper and from the wider agenda of early years and early help, and I'll certainly work with members on the forward plan to think about how we can help move that forward going in the future.
I'd like to say thank you to the officers for attempt to answer some quite difficult, hard questions. Appreciate very much your efforts to do that. So some conclusions and recommendations we wish to record. I've got a few. I think we agreed that we will ask the officers to share with us the contract for services of the KPIs currently exist for the Hope Centre. We also would like to get a comparison to those KPIs and how they met with the dread-free services. We'd like to know more about the Friends of Deborah, so contact information and what's the background to them. We want to get evidence of other interested parties who could be invited to tender, because we've seen no evidence, and several people said that, but what other interested parties they might be, because that might have quite an influence on whether exemption might be more appropriate or not. So that leads to the next point. We'd like to check the procurement rules for tendering and Kate to provide exempt information, and if it's possible for us to exempt the tendering process at this stage, given some of the reasons that have been risen, to allow this to go on to the end of 2024. And I think there's a question about cost of tendering as well, whether it was actually a part of that process, whether the cost of tendering actually meant that it was less efficient to have another tender, given I know it meets the requirements for just over 25k, but it's very close to it. The last one I got down was that either visit to and/or testimony from Hope Centre themselves, so we can get their view of just what the situation is coming. I would suggest either to this meeting or to a workshop for us to have a discussion with them. So those are all the ones I got down as recommendation I want to put forward. Councillor Hewitt.
Yeah, I'd like a recommendation that, well, you said about visiting, but I would also like to have some evidence about how the discontinuity on a change of service would impact the relationships that service users have. Because what we're talking about here is probably people who are quite vulnerable, but suddenly said, oh, you're going to meet someone else, you're going to be working with someone else, you'll be working in a different framework. And I would like to know what the human impact of that sort of decision is going to be.
Well, I'll put a bit of summary of my thoughts so far then. So, from what I understand, the current service provider has only been in like a year, where they've had one contract management so far, and they've due another one. So there's not a great deal of sort of contract management within that provider so far. However, there does appear to be a lot of local support. They seem to do a very good job, and people are recommending them that they're awarded a longer time period for it, which I think is pretty good, and that's quite a good management of that. What I don't understand is local support is good, but we haven't managed it. That's not good enough. We need to address that. In the tendering scope, I don't really understand. I think Councillor Shaw said in his first bit, like we're not really sure what they're tendering for. And I don't understand what we're asking the service providers to provide to us. We don't understand what KPIs they're going to monitor to in the contract award from when we get it. So that's still not clear for us to do. I'm not really sure why it's actually come to us, to be honest, because it looks like it's a procurement process that's done to us before they do the procurement process. So I don't understand that, other than there's a bit of local passion about the fact that we lose it before they get to award a next tender, which just seems really odd to come to this forum. So my recommendation, oddly, I'm going to state this, is to just extend it to Hope until the tendering procedure is complete. And the tendering procedure can only be complete once you've made tender documents to be all taken to everybody. They supply you their feedback of why they want to be awarded this contract. Procurement decide it's the right one. We can then decide again if we'd like this one, or we'd rather go with the local one that we know better. So give us idea of continuity to a service provider, build a local relationship with local people, and you go to its KPI and that contract management better then. I just feel we've spent an hour debating thinking it shouldn't have done that in lots of ways, because it's not constructed right to get here. And I find it really frustrating.
And that's a good question. I think it's a bigger question of just procurement of one particular centre. It's about the whole principle and the strategy of should it all be in-house as one service, or is it potentially possible to have outside? So that's a bigger question.
I completely understand the one service, but we've got a really good service provider locally that seems to be working, is currently in quite a short-term contract where we haven't been able to give it any sort of real contract management review back yet, since we've got no KPIs from it. We're already saying it's going to go out to be procured for a new tender with up to 4 people because that's how big this contract is. Which, to be fair, if you made that contract like £2 less, it wouldn't have to go to that. You know, you're just bouncing it into that thing by making it a couple of quid too expensive. You could bring it back in. I'm sure you could find some way of bringing it within that and managing that service as well. It just seems it's that we've spent an hour here all our time on quite a small contract for it, but delivers a really great service. We're trying to make it overcomplicated. Why don't we just extend this one with an exemption for a small provider in this one locality that's doing a good service, which could be a benchmark model for the rest of the county to follow, where you could really make this work and be different. And as I've said, with lots of other things we do, we've got a small scope of time to make a change. And this doesn't look like trying to make a change. It's like just going balls stepping forward. That's how every council does it. Why don't we try and do something different? And give us
somebody said that's the key issue now. My concern is that early years, the first 1001 days dictates how people come back for services later in life.
Yeah.
So it's the whole strategy of how do we make the most of those first 5 years, which is an even bigger picture procured in one contract. So really, it's just about that we would be having this conversation. But I think the early years strategy of how do we invest in that to ensure that it costs us less as a proportion of the whole council budget in future years. We need to know this information in order to help see how we can input into the early years strategy, in my view of it.
So that's the recommendation. Sorry. But following on from what you said, and this was something that I was thinking about earlier, we need those heat maps, and we also need, you know, basically an audit, an impact assessment audit of what these different centres, the impact of them has been. And the only way you can do that is to look at the evidence of what's been coming through to MASH or you know, deprivation indices and what the schools say about, you know, the level of need in their area, and see what's in the area and then have some analysis of that. And we can't, and that's the sort of evidence I would like to come back when we discuss early help, because I think that would be really valuable.
Yeah, so there's 3 things to my mind it seems we're looking at. One is the impact on early years by different ways of delivering the service. Second, this particular contract and how that should be managed and can it be exempted or not. And then thirdly, any input we can then add into the overall strategy for early years. So I think those are 3 issues. And as you say, it was just about procurement, then we've been spending a lot of time talking about that. But I think those other 2 issues are a much bigger picture, which looking at this contract kind of informs about that's the way I see it anyway. Right, so we've got a number of recommendations that's been put and given Sarah a few minutes to type them up. If we can go through them when you're ready, Sarah, and see if we agree that we're happy.
Chairman, I am waiting. I had my hand up for about 15 minutes now.
I'm sorry, I thought it was the same one as Sharon before. Councillor Kenyon. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I do take my hand up and down as I'm being spoken to, and I don't know who does it, but I know Councillor Stone's had the same problem. I'd just like to reiterate again, I follow up what Councillor Andrews said. We've, in my opinion, we haven't made the best use of an hour and a half of this committee's time. We're talking about micromanaging something that we have managers that are paid for within our service, the Herefordshire Council, to do. How did this get flagged up? Why did this come to us now at this time? And perhaps it could have not come to this scrutiny committee, and we could have spent time on other things. We're micromanaging something that we don't need to micromanage. We're getting involved in something we don't need to be involved in. And I think I am going to say it's been a complete waste of my time for the last hour and a half. So that's where I come from. And recommendation wise, you can say what the hell you want, but Richard Watson has still got to do his job the way he does it every time. So it doesn't matter what you say or what you do, what recommendations, he will do his job in line with how he's told to do his job. And that's not by us.
Mate, thank you. Are you ready to read out the recommendation, Sarah?
Just getting that.
Sarah, Councillor, you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you. Just So this is really a legacy of the old work programme, which we're trying to change, and but it was still on there, so it had to be addressed because it was already on there. But we are hoping that the work programme in the future will be different and not have these things.
Thank you. Good point. Right. Have we got the recommendations we can go through?
Okay, I will try and get these on screen. There's another one like this somewhere.
See them on screen?
Right, so I badged this in as the committee notes the proposals to recommission the provision of the children's centre service in the Boreal area for 2 years and makes the following recommendations to enhance the effectiveness of the plans. A, that the executive consider the exemptions for the contract procedure should be applied for. B, that the executive consider whether further market testing should be carried out to evidence if there are other potential providers. C, I think was going to be that's for evidence on how this continuing current provider would impact on service users.
That was from Councillor Hewitt, yes.
In terms of the other aspects, I think probably there are actions to be noted, for the actions are the proposed recommendations.
Yeah, fine.
Points as regards the operational KPIs, etc. If there's any further recommendations to the executive.
There's a recommendation from Councillor Selwyn that we had either evidence from or a meeting with or testimony from the Hope Centre. I think that would be useful to include in the recommendation. Proviso, the other points are action points to go in the minutes. Will everybody agree those are the key recommendations? Can we propose we accept them then? We did, but that's so we'll put those as action points in the action tracker as opposed to recommendations.
I'd like my int B to make the inclusion of what's going into the tendering requirements that people are going to put the tenders out to. So whilst it says executive considers the further market testing, that should be carried out of evidence.
If there are potential providers and what we have to provide.
To give you a challenge back, Chair, is like whilst you're saying you want to make a change so you understand where things are, what would you like to see in there? Is that SLA provision that they're going to tender against to say this is where user scrutiny want to give this direction to change in this, and then hold the cabinet lead to say, and the officers, this is what you agreed to in the contract, service providers we're going to provide. That's the change of direction you expect our council to make looking after this.
Well, that's what we want the evidence.
And I think somewhere in that line needs to say what's going to go in to the tendering document that we expect them to provide as provision for their service that they're paying for.
Maybe a separate line, the content on the tendering document and what people will be asked to proposal.
No, I don't know if Councillor Shaw's still on. He popped up for a couple of minutes. I think that's probably what his question was at the start.
You there, Councillor Shaw?
I am, yes.
Finally. Okay. Thank you for joining us. How much have you heard?
I quite an amount of the meeting, and I listened with great interest. I thought, that the committee did come up with some quite insightful thoughts. Obviously, the whole thing it's a very complicated area. We're as a committee, you are looking at, I suppose, value for money and those sort of things. But at the end of the day, I think the continuity for the children, for the young families of Bromyard and the surrounding area has to be recognised somehow. It's not, and in such a small value contract, it can't be a nature of, well, you know, we can get this similar provision for £5 less per head elsewhere. That can't be the reason for taking a decision. But how that ties into our tendering processes and our procurement processes is something perhaps I need to take away as Chair of Audit and Governance and have a think about how our thresholds really reflect what happens when officers need to contract in the real world, and that again is a complicated area. But I do appreciate the points you're making and the recommendations that you're taking forward.
Okay, so you're comfortable with those then?
Sorry.
You're comfortable with the recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Kenny, your hands up again. Is that something you wanted to add?
Always, Chairman. I'm just looking at recommendation D. It says about visits and testimonies. Well, we've got two councillors here. We've got one in the room, we've got one remotely, who have visited and they've given their testimony. I think, you know, we really don't need to micromanage this. We've got far more important things we can put on our plate and get on with than worry about this. And I just go back to, we should let the officer manage this situation and then scrutinise the manager. That's what we should be doing. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I think we need to move. We have taken a lot of time. We do need to move on a lot of points. Just let's get these recommendations agreed so we can move on. I have to say, I do think, and it's interesting how we have split views about whether we wasted time and trouble on contract or not. To my mind, early years is perhaps the most significant thing we should be looking at, because it's the one thing that it dictates how the lives of young people, whether they become people we have to look after or not, how that happens. And if by looking at this detail of how one contract is managed, it helps us to manage early years work in future much better, then personally I think it's been a very good use of our time. I know it's been frustrating, but I think it's such an important issue that looking at one contract and looking at the wider picture in the context of that is as important to work as it's good.
Chairman, can I just come back? It's not our job, Chairman. This isn't our job. And that's why I'm finding it really difficult, because it's not our job to do this.
What to do what?
To micromanage a contract. We're micromanaging.
We're not doing that. I'm saying that's exactly what we're not doing. What we're doing is looking at how we provide early year service, which is part of what we should scrutinise, and looking at one contract. It's a micro contract, but it helps us to understand whether what we believe the council is doing is the best way of delivering early years service or not, because it impacts directly on the budget of money we spend eventually on people who aren't properly looked after in early years and come back as vulnerable children. I would say there's nothing more important for us to look at in the wider context, even though it's frustrating looking at one small contract. That could help to help the council deliver earlier services better.
And also, it's raised a strategic consideration for audit and governance about procurement thresholds, which will directly affect the way we deliver services. So I actually think it's been a valuable conversation, even though, you know, unpicking it is, you know, it is complex and time consuming. I think it's important. I think the people of Bromyard will probably appreciate us looking at things in detail.
Right, are we ready to finish the recommendation? think we added Councillor Andrews' point about and notice they're actually being asked to attend. Does that meet your requirement, Councillor Andrews, putting those words in? Okay, right, so suppose we accept those 4 recommendations then. Well, all of those, can you seconder? Councillor Fagan, you seconding?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favour? Anyone against? I think that's unanimous. Were you voting for, Councillor Andrews? Yes. Okay, thank you. No abstentions, I don't think. Right, that's carried. Thank you very much. A long conversation. I do believe it's valuable. Thanks very much. Thanks to the officers for your contributions. Can I suggest we have a 5-minute break before we get to the next topic? Yep. Okay, 5 minutes and we'll come back.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Felton, for coming. It's a very valuable contribution. Hopefully we did justice to your time here. Can I confirm the...
Apologies, Chair, for not being at the beginning of the meeting. We had some complications here, but thank you to the committee and yourself for the consideration.
You submitted a very comprehensive report which we read out. Thank you. We've got Councillor Kenyon.
Kenyon's still with us.
Councillor.
Don't worry, Chairman, I'm here.
Thank you. I can see you. Yes, I'll watch out for your hand. Thank you. I think we've got everyone back again. Okay, thank you. We're on our item 8 of the agenda: effective scrutiny of children's services training and development offer. We always knew that last session would be a long one because of all the passion and detail involved. This is an important one, but I guess it's more straightforward, and it's a case of outlining to the committee the sort of training program we're putting together to help us scrutinise more effectively. The agenda is to review and approve the Local Government Association Scrutiny Training and Development Office. I'd like to welcome those attending. As I've already said previously, welcome Claire Burgess and LGA. Thanks for joining us, Claire, and sitting through the last session. John Coleman, Democratic Services Manager, and I'd like to begin by inviting John to please.
Thank you, Chair. So I will just do a very short introduction. The papers are hopefully self-explanatory, but as with all of the scrutiny committees in the council, they demonstrated a desire to see a training and an improvement and a development programme, which we're looking to accommodate. We're very grateful to the LGA who brought forward a bespoke training package, very much designed to assist the committee in asking both the right questions and interrogating the right issues moving forward. I won't go into the detail of the plans. I'll hand over to Claire to do that. But hopefully, with members having read the papers, the offer is hopefully self-explanatory, and I'll hand over to Claire now to add in the detail.
Okay, thank you. Claire, over to you. Yes, so just to outline, Councillor and myself had 2 conversations with you about what you can offer, engaging proactively, and we we felt there was a great deal of merit in having the offer put to this committee by yourself, because we think that would be really useful scrutiny to avail ourselves of your services. So thanks again for coming, and look forward to hearing you what you've got to say about the offer.
Maybe I'll just start by providing some context of who I am and the work I'm already doing with Herefordshire. So I work for the LGA in the West Midlands as their Children's Improvement Advisor. I do sit on your improvement board, your independently chaired improvement board.
Sorry, Claire. Can you get near the mic, please, Claire? It's a bit difficult to hear this far down the room. Thank you.
There we go. Is that better?
That's much better.
Okay. So I sit on your improvement board, and we have been providing bespoke sort of support through various grants and associates to support you on your improvement work. And one of the areas has been around member development. So the LGA, as you may know, is a member-led organisation. So all our offers are fully subsidised for members. So that includes mentoring, bespoke support around corporate parenting, and bespoke support around scrutiny. So I've been having particular conversations with John Coleman, your DCS, and particularly Councillor Hewitt and Councillor Howells around what the offer could look like. So the papers that you have got are an offer that we've been putting together for some time, so that we can ensure some consistency, but keep the offer quite bespoke to individual councils. And the aim would be that we would deliver that here with a core group of people who have been involved in developing this, and that includes members and associates. So you already have Gillian Ford working with you, Councillor Gillian Ford, and we're looking for another member who's part of our group. She's not working with you in scrutiny, but she's working supporting members in the council. So I think I'm just here really to say this offer has been built around a number of years of developing scrutiny support. It's often been quite bitty, so we're trying to ensure the LGA that we make this much more consistent. So this particular offer is going to be run in 3 councils concurrently. So it will include yourselves, Dudley and Medway, just so that you know that. They're all authorities where they're on an improvement journey, but different parts of that improvement journey. And for Herefordshire, we've obviously made it bespoke to the conversations that we've been having. So it really compiles of self-assessment, which we've been having conversations, John and I, and I've met with Matthew Sampson as well in his quality assurance role. The self-assessment, asking you to self-assess where you think you are in terms of the starting base for your development. This is absolutely about development. It's also about sustainability, so that this work would continue to support you going forward, whoever's on the committee, really. So you'll have seen you've got the self-assessment, and it really just asks you to look at some statements, which are statements that we've collected from a number of places around key issues that have faced different scrutiny committees and challenges, as well as things that have worked well. To just self-assess whether you feel you're on the beginning of the journey in terms of your development, whether you're developing your practice, you've got to the place where you're really developing that practice, and whether you're in, or whether you feel you're really on that journey and you're embedding it, and you will be in different places for different parts of the framework that we've developed. So the framework is a 6 module, if you like, framework, and the self-assessment is aligned to that framework. So I won't go through all of that unless you want me to. Some of it's about knowledge around the subject matter, some of it's around planning and setting out your work programme. Some of it's much more around the culture, your vision for scrutiny, what you want scrutiny to be for children's services in Herefordshire. So it's quite broad ranging, but they will be linked, and we will evaluate after each session where and how that session has worked. But also we will come back in 6 months' time and just see what the impact of the training has been, which I think is really important. So really hoping you've read it. Just we've done quite a lot of preparation to get it to where it is now. But obviously, as a committee, it's up to you and members of the committee to feel whether you want to sign up to this.
Thank you, Claire. That's all part of the work the committee's been doing, recognised early on that the training that we get is people nil to get into scrutiny. So we all agree we need a more comprehensive training program, particularly with the complexity of the improvement plan. So if you may remember, we agreed we need some short-term training on simple things like a glossary of terms, a structure of all the officers that we deal with, how they relate to each other, and a reading list. And those are things that Claire and the LJ can probably help us with. And then we also said we needed some medium-term training, and the idea of the workshops we're having is by having workshops we can learn in the process of having workshops, talking with people about relevant issues. And then, John, you're working with the Centre for Government Support in producing what will ultimately, I think, turn out to be a scrutiny manual, which is a bit more medium to long term. And putting those together would then mean that we would have in time a pretty comprehensive training and induction programme for both the councillor members and some version of that for co-optees, which we still haven't done and which we need to do. That really summarises where we are just a bit. And you might like to know, members, that the LJ produce a scrutiny leadership essentials course, which is essentially for chair people, but actually both Jenny are booked on, and the LJ have agreed to that, given that we're going through particularly complex times. At the moment, we're having to round up our knowledge and ability in the context of also scrutinising an improvement plan. So it might have been a bit slow, but we are very much further forward in putting together some training that will help us all do our job. As you say, you sent us for 6 section criteria. Is that something we now need to do individually or as a committee? That's the first question I've got for you.
It's really up to you. So there's a number of ways you could do it. You know, it has to be what is most helpful for you. And we talked, John and Matthew and I earlier today. You could do it as the chair and vice chair and consult. You could do it with a small focus group from the committee, or you could do it as a whole committee. But that, you know, that often has time implications. The idea is really that you don't spend too much time analysing it, that really it's what when you look at those questions which are in the self-assessment, you know, what is your initial feeling around that? Because it's not a test, it's absolutely not a test. It's, you know, where and what you know. It's a tool to help the members and the officers, associates from the LGA who will support the delivery of the programme. So it's a two-way process, really. It'll give you a bit of a benchmark about where you feel your development needs are, you know, as a committee, and maybe as individuals as well when you're looking at it. But most importantly, it'll inform the development and the planning of the sessions that we do with you going forward. Because obviously, if you feel you've got things really embedded, we don't want to be doing things just at the beginning of the journey. You know, it helps us sort of target and make sure that the information that you get and the discussion, the level of the discussion that you're having is at the right level for the committee. I mean, we have to recognise different people will have different experiences as well on the committee. So some people will be maybe quite experienced in scrutiny, some might be really new to the role. So it's also a bit about levelling it up so that as a committee, you have a joint understanding. I mean, that discussion earlier was an interesting discussion for me to hear. You know, you have a joint understanding around, well, what is the role of scrutiny? What is our role as an individual on the scrutiny committee? But as a committee, what is your role? And what would success look like? really for you going forward. So how you do that is for you to decide. I wouldn't, you know, we do it in different ways. So we have done it with just the chair and the vice chair on behalf of the committee, if you feel that's helpful. We've done it with a small focus group, and we have done it as a whole committee. So
Thank you.
you know, I think that's your choice to make, and we will accommodate that and do whatever we can do. I mean, we could do it as individual members, and we'll just pull together an analysis if that would be helpful. You know, the common themes that emerge.
So let's hear what people think. So basically what we're saying, Cabinet have agreed that we will engage with both the Centre for Government Support with the work that John's doing, and we'll engage with yourselves quite separately, but particularly helping training and support for scrutiny. We've talked about the Leadership Essentials course, which myself and Councillor Hewitt are going on, that you can help us in some of those other areas. We've also talked about a mentor, another councillor mentor from another council who's gone through a similar improvement process, who can work with this committee and perhaps come and present to us if we wish that.
Well, the programme will be delivered by at least one member, if not two, and they've both been through improvement journeys. And
your team is 4 people, I gather, in total, that can offer support.
Yeah.
Okay, so open up to the committee to ask questions. Councillor Kenyon, I can see your hand that's up. Over to you first.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to point out that I've done a scrutiny chairman's course, and I've done scrutiny for probably eight years, as various different parts during the council. So I deem myself fairly experienced. And when I sent an email back saying I don't particularly need any training, that might be a little flippant of me. We can always benefit from training, but it's got to be aimed at the right things. And also, it would be good that, sorry, I didn't catch her name, said just, we need to get a standard. We need to get a standard and ensure we know what we're scrutinising. And I think by you and Jenny going on that course, you will benefit from that massively, because we can concentrate on the things we really need to do and on the things that not necessarily need to do. So I just wanted to share my experience and also offer my mentoring if anyone would like to buddy up with me for any mentoring wise or conversations before meetings. I'm very happy to act as a buddy for anybody that feels they need that. Thank you.
Thank you. Points well made about the training and agreeing, and thanks for clarifying that. You had your hand up, Councillor.
Yes, thank you. I think it's really important. I've just taken the first point. How do you ensure you have knowledge and you make the right decisions? Well, I mean, relying on my gut to make the decisions. I mean, is my gut the right decision? No. I need to know that I'm going to make the right decision, not just rely on my gut. And just to say that you can be the most famous actor, you can be the best sports person, the best singer, you still have training.
Indeed. I always remember when I did my sales training, the guy always used to say the best salesman on the front line of getting more training, which I think the point that you just made, Councillor Kenyon. Yeah, you can have background training, you can always update it. So any questions anybody else would like to ask or raise?
Can I just be clear? So we're, this is like classroom needs analysis, and then you get where you're going to target your lesson here. So that's the areas for development. So are you suggesting that we will have on this committee one mentor who will look at page 66 and 67, step 1 knowledge, and we'll have fill that out, and they will then make a programme to help with that step 1. Is that the way it works, or do we ask our own officers to help us with what arises?
So essentially the programme's been developed. We have somebody who used to be the children's expert at the Centre for Public Scrutiny, so we will be working quite closely with them because they're delivering a much more wider programme around good scrutiny. The self-assessment is part of the process of enabling you as a group to see where your areas for development might be. And it might be that you feel all those areas are appropriate for looking around continuous improvement and strengthening scrutiny.
And if that's the case, what we've done is we've looked at we know what the statutory guidance says around children's services. We know what the statutory guidance is around scrutiny. So we have built into the programme core elements that make good scrutiny. What we will do in terms of the self-assessment is bespoke that input. So it'll be through workshops, 6 workshops over a period of time. What we will do is build the inputs based on where you feel you are in terms of your knowledge as a committee.
Okay, so just a follow-up question. So part of this package is an offer of 6 workshops.
Yes.
So how many of the steps do we have to do before you have enough evidence for the first input? Do we do the whole self-assessment and then come back to
I think what we would like you to do, which would be most helpful, we think, in terms of the development, is to look at that self-assessment questionnaire now. And because what we will do at the end of the process is go back to you with you and work through. So what's the impact of this training been? This is where you felt you were at the beginning as a group, and this is where you feel you are now. And it might be around work planning and programming, understanding your role as a scrutiny committee, being part of the organisational change, culture change, potentially that's one of the steps. So I think it's about working through it. And the reason they're sequenced as they are is because we've learned, having worked with, years, decades with councils supporting scrutiny, that order is helpful in terms of building your skills and your expertise.
So can I go back to my question? Is that I understand what you're saying about the steps. Do you want us to complete the questionnaire for step 1, and then you will fit in a programme, or do you want us to complete the whole of the questionnaire before you start delivering a programme?
Yes, because that will inform how we deliver the programme at what level.
Okay.
Because it's all interlinked, those areas, those 6, if you like, those 6 modules, the 6-step framework, as we've called it, is that they're all key core ingredients to good scrutiny. So it would be good for you, we think, and you can decide if it is, but certainly it's worked in many other places, to have a bit of a baseline from where you're starting so that you could see yourselves how you're developing.
That's clear, thank you. So when will the LGA be ready to start delivering a programme of training, having had our feedback? What sort of time?
We're ready to go. I mean, I've been having these discussions for quite a few months with the council, and circumstances have delayed it a bit, but we can do this as soon as you're ready to do it.
Okay, to move progress, I want to suggest that do the committee agree that we should do a self-assessment? And if you do, I'll make a suggestion that maybe myself and the Vice Chair have a first stab at filling it in, then pass it down to the committee and say, give a week for you to come back on it, and then we can send our considered opinions back to Claire. That would seem to me to be a practical way of doing it. Alternatively, we can have a workshop together, but I think probably the quickest way would be probably the way I've just outlined. Any thoughts on that? So Fabian, you and Nolly, do you agree that?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. That's a good way forward.
Okay.
I disagree. I think we should all do it.
Yeah, I actually agree with that last comment.
Is that Councillor Summers?
Yes, it was. I said I disagree. I think we should all do it.
Yeah, I was offering options. I think it would be better if we all did it, but it's whether we all agree that we want to. Yeah, if we agree, then fine. Let's call a meeting as soon as possible to do it.
I don't feel I could answer for other members. That's the point for me, is that I can answer for myself, but I don't know all the other members well enough to answer for them. So,
do we agree? Do you want a physical meeting or a Zoom meeting?
I would prefer a Zoom meeting or something like that.
I think we could have this, couldn't we? So we'll call a Zoom meeting as soon as possible, and we'll go through together.
Can I just ask why we can't do it ourselves at home? Why do we have to have a Zoom?
Well, we said we wanted to do it together. That was what people seem to feel.
No. Literally, I think is what Councillor Summers was suggesting, and I was sort of agreeing with it.
Oh, I thought you were saying we should do it together rather than separately, Councillor Summers. Can you just clarify?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Did you?
I think we should. I think we should do it all together. I don't think just the chair and the vice should.
Selectively, I mean collectively, we should do it.
Collectively, we all need it. As far as I'm concerned, I need it.
Collectively, but on Zoom.
We're all doing it.
That'd be great.
Something else as well.
Okay,
can I just answer? Sorry, can I just interrupt? Because I don't want this to become too big a thing.
No.
Because it is just a tool, and you know you'll have to reach some kind of a consensus between you about where you think you are. But individually, it's important, isn't it, to know that in your heads before that discussion. But you know, I don't want you certainly as a committee to be spending hours and hours and hours navel gazing around this, because it is quite, it shouldn't be too difficult to do. It's an indicator, and then we can unpick some of those issues when we need to. Also to say, if you wanted to do it together, then there's the offer of Matthew Sampson or myself to support you with that.
If we did it over Zoom collectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I think Councillor Summers is saying. Councillor Kenyon, you had your hand up.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I just feel that your suggestion was the best one, that yourself and Councillor Hewitt go on it and assess it. It might be fantastic. It might not be what it says on the tin. But I think as Chairman and Vice Chairman, you get paid to do these roles, and you know, we don't. And taking more time off to do a course potentially that we don't know anything about isn't a good use of my time again. So I would benefit from your experience and Councillor Hewitt's experience going on it. That's my thoughts on it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And the course is only next week, so we might benefit from going on the course and then doing the assessment after that, potentially. And then once we've done that, submit it to the rest of the committee. You agree with that? And if you want to call together as a Zoom meeting, fine. If you want to individually, we can gauge that once we've done the assessment as chair and vice chair. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions anybody's got that want to raise about how we do that? Okay. Any other questions for Claire and the LGA? Mike?
Yeah.
And Sanders. Mike Johnson.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a, while I welcome any training, and we can all go on learning right till the day we die. What I am concerned about is that we don't go away from the picture of actually children's scrutiny and like they just said about, you know, putting it. It's important, but we've got a lot of time, and we miss what's happening because things change, and this scrutiny training shouldn't just be. It should really be right across the board, because all councillors are inexperienced in some way or another. I mean, I welcome it. Yeah.
Thank you. This training, just to be clear, so this training would be for you as a committee, working together. It would be additional to your meeting times.
Yeah.
So it is a commitment. But equally, it's specifically looking at scrutiny through the lens of children's services, which is, you know, like you have housing, you have, you know, all the other scrutiny, committee resources and finances. There are specific issues around children's services because it is regulated, and you know, your lead member has a statutory role that are very specific. So we will absolutely link with the wider scrutiny programme that's being offered, but this will be specifically just focusing on children.
Yeah, good point to differentiate. As we know, we've already gone through a governance process for the whole council and changed the way we do scrutiny as committees. What you're doing, John, is about probably a manual that covers scrutiny generically, not just children's services. But what Claire and the LGA are offering is particularly children's scrutiny services. So there's a hierarchy of the way in which we manage scrutiny. As you're quite right to say, Councillor Jones, we need to be all trained in being able to scrutinise effectively whichever committee we're on. But Claire's work is about particularly children's scrutiny. Yeah. John, you're going to make a point.
Just to add to that, we've got a meeting with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny on Friday. So whatever is agreed around this training package, we will look to dovetail in the work of the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny around that broader skill set that will be required across all scrutiny committees. committees.
Okay, great, thank you. So unless there's any other questions, shall we formulate some recommendations?
Can I just ask whether that means that we have to complete this for you so that you can dovetail in with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny on Friday? No. No.
I've had conversations with Ed Hammond, who's the lead at the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and we've had a few conversations over the summer about how we can best help Herefordshire, and this is what we've agreed, that it would be better to have two programmes, but that we will link across. So you for some of it, like the work programme and things, you'll be getting some of that support in the wider scrutiny development and training. But what we will be focusing on is that through the lens of children's services.
Thank you for it. Okay, so some recommendations. You noted, Claire, Sarah, that you said that committee notes the LGA training and development officer set up appendix to see the report, makes the following recommendations. One recommendation will be that we agree as a committee, presumably, that we would wish to engage with the LGA to help and support and mentor us in our work and children's scrutiny. That's one recommendation I suggest that we make. It was agreed that the chair and the vice chair would complete the self-assessment as the chair after they've been on the Leadership Essentials course, and then submit it to the rest of the committee for any comments before we then submit it to the LGA for them to tailor a course for us.
No, make a recommendation.
So yes, so that's one I got. You make one.
Well, as sort of in addition to what you just said, that members of the committee feel free to just email any feedback on this screening pack that we've got here, the self-assessment pack, that they know they want help and development in, because I don't feel I necessarily know where your needs lie.
We didn't do that at the beginning, didn't we? We asked everybody to submit a return to John about the training we needed. So I think that could follow once we've done the assessment, people come back and give
whatever, but if anybody wants to give any input, that would be gratefully received.
It's a good point to note. I think the last recommendation I've got is that we, what word we'd actually use, that we note that Democratic Services are working with the Centre for Governance Support and look forward to the outcome of that work. Would that be a suitable recommendation for work you and John?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we'll continue to work with both the LGA and Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. Also, just to say as well, we've got project management support for this. So once we need to develop, the programme of the training itself, we'll have support there to make sure that meetings are plumbed into the diary and so forth.
Great, thank you. So I think that's 3 recommendations, Sarah. Anybody got anything to add to that? Do you agree those are the ones we should make?
Chair, just an observation with the Centre for Governance training, which I'm sure will be a feature of the LGA as well. We're also trying to look to involve officers as part of that as well, so that the learning is shared not just across the councillors but across the officer cohorts.
It's a much bigger document than just children's scrutiny as a whole, both the councillors and the officers' point of view.
And the thinking being that there will be a sort of philosophy that if we're extending the training to officers as well, you're giving people a net rather than the fish, if that makes sense. Yeah. So there'll be a broader set of resource available for the scrutiny committees to draw on from the officer cohorts as well.
Makes sense, thank you. Councillor Kennedy, while we're waiting for Sarah to have the recommendations, I see your hands up again.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've always got lots to say. You dragged me here and I'm going to say something. Co-optees, there's a huge shortage of co-optees we've got on this committee at the moment. I know it's not particularly to do with this, but I think it should be mentioned that looking at me, I don't look particularly young, but I'd hazard a guess I'm the youngest person on the scrutiny committee, be that I can't vote, but I'm the youngest person on it. We do need. Yeah, but you wouldn't realise by looking at your lovely pictures of faces I've seen today. But the co-opting, looking at the co-opted people, we really do need to get some younger people involved in it. And if we're going to do this training, if you're going to put me through it, which I'll happily do, let's get the co-optees going on it as well and find out how they can better scrutinise, because the time when I've seen people co-opted onto committees, they sit there very quietly and they leave early, and because they don't feel involved, and because a lot of the time they don't know what to say and when to say it. So get some younger co-optees. I'm not being ageist there in the slightest. I think we've got our quota of over 50s, dare I say. Let's get that organised and sorted, because we become a better committee by having a wider range of people inputted.
Absolutely agree, and you might be pleased to know we've actually raised that point already. It does say that co-optees should be trained within a month of being co-opted, so we're well aware we're behind with that. We've agreed that whatever programme we put together, some version of that, if not the complete one, should be given to the co-optees as well. We've only got 2 official co-optees at the moment, which I think have joined us today. We have other co-optees, we're still waiting for those bodies to come back. We have agreed that we will appoint another co-optee who represents the families, the users of the service. We had a chat with Claire at council last week about that we wondered whether it had to be a change to the constitution or not to have a new co-optee. The advice given back was we don't. So the adverts for another co-optee, the extra one that we've already agreed with this committee, will be going out hopefully this week. So yeah, not only we need more, we need more of the ones that we need one more new one. We need the co-optees are already in place formally to actually put their names forward, and you're quite right, we know we need to train co-optees as well as ourselves.
Can I also make a suggestion? In my experience in the past, that many co-optees, they start and they start to fall away because they lose interest because they're not engaged. So I don't know what knack you're going to do, give out biscuits, something like that, get them along, whatever you decide to do, but we need to look after the co-optees, because there are some good ones out there and they can make a huge difference to a committee and change a room.
It's a disappointment we haven't had more proposed by the bodies that can propose them. We have been trying to chase them, I know. John Coleman.
Just to really expand on Councillor Kenyon's point, which is also that the committee will be encouraged going forward to use more expert witnesses as well. So you can look to develop the scrutiny skill set through inviting expert witnesses too.
Yeah, okay, thank you. How are we doing, Sarah?
Can we use looked after children for co-optees?
Probably not children, I think, probably because of their age, but maybe families or carers for them.
Well, some of them are older now, they're up to 26 and have looked after children.
But that is what we're doing, we're advertising for somebody to come on board as a co-optee to represent the users of the service, which could be a carer, it could be somebody who's left service, somebody, a care, maybe somebody who's now gone past care, somebody over 60.
The looked after children feel they don't, the looked after children, a lot of them feel they don't have a say. This would give them a say, and there's quite a few over 18. So I think we really need to be looking at this quite closely. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we, as I say, the extra co-optee is someone who is experienced in the services, whether it's a parent, a young person maybe who's transitioned into adult care.
No, but they're tired of having adults tell them what to do. So parents, etc., we shouldn't be looking at that. We should be looking at the looked after children. Let them speak for themselves. Thank you.
Point. Councillor, you want to make a point about that?
Yeah, it's actually something which I wanted to raise earlier, because somewhere in this report it talks about having children in to give their voice, and I feel incredibly strongly about this issue, that requiring somebody who's possibly had a very difficult start in life to come and give extra evidence in a forum to people that have a general interest to drive improvement, but not a personal relationship with them of continuity, is an added extra stress on somebody who's had mental health difficulties. And I go back to reiterating that it should be a participatory officer who collects the voice of young people, and should be, and we were given an offer from the previous director that participatory officer would come regularly to children's scrutiny and give evidence for, on behalf of those children. That hasn't as yet happened, but I actually think that would be a very valuable co-optee onto children's scrutiny, every time we meet to give the voice of the children. I agree with the idea behind what Councillor Summers is saying, that we need to hear that voice. But I think the way in which we do it needs to be incredibly sensitively handled.
And that's part of the problem. We have looked at this. And the whole point about our bottom-up approach to this is innovative, but it also raises exactly the sorts of sensitivity challenges which probably why scrutiny has been reluctant to do in the past, because there are lots of issues which we are exploring legal about how we can do all this bottom-up work, talk to all those different people involved, and reflect the sort of sensitivity the council has talked about. But if we have a new co-op team representing the use of the service, that doesn't mean we can't call in people to our workshops and meetings as required if they're willing and able to come. And we could obviously be creative about doing that, maybe outside, have a task in a group, or maybe 2 or 3 councillors might go and meet somebody, then report back to the committee. There are different ways of doing it. Councillor Hanson, you want
Yeah, can I just, I mean, there's Your Voice Matters, there's Closed House, No One Door, you know, they all come involved with this.
Are we ready with the? Oh, sorry.
So,
Yeah.
just to make a point on that, I mean, part of the support and development work is around learning as well about good practice from other places, and there's some excellent practice around how you get the voice of children and young people into both corporate parenting boards, scrutiny committees, other governance boards. That doesn't mean they have to actually physically come, you know, but the voices can be really, really loud. So part of the work and the training will be about giving you some learning from other places of how they do things.
Presumably, once we've done our assessment, got it back to you, work out a programme for us. It would include suggestions for those areas, I imagine. Yeah, great, thank you. How are we doing, Sarah? Have we got the recommendations we can put up, please?
Okay, so we've got the recommendations that the committee agrees to engage with the LGA training and development offer. The chairperson and vice chairperson to draft a response to the self-assessment tool after completing the leadership essentials course and then discuss with the purpose. And we note that this will dovetail in with the offer from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny.
If we agree that's fair reflection of the conversation, so propose we accept those.
Can you just put a November date on sharing with the members, please? Well, just to say that we will share in November, so that there's a date. Pretty keen. Pretty keen on it.
Yes, always good to have dates. Okay, with that addition, certainly propose we accept those recommendations. Councillor Fagan, seconded Councillor Jones, all in favour? Yep, I think you're voting for, Councillor Andrews. Yeah, agreed. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Claire. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'll leave you now. Okay, thank you.
You thought it was valuable listening.
No, I'll be back.
Have some information to help guide us. And
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Really appreciate it. And it's good for all the committee members to have met you as well.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you.
We've made good progress on that. So we come to our start of the agenda, which is the work programme review. To review the work programme 2021-2022 responses to recommendations previously made. We've got the updated recommendation action tracker appendix 1. You may remember we agreed at the beginning of the year, it was very helpful to capture actions that the committee had agreed on, which weren't formally documented in the recommendations. Because one of the criticisms was we had lots of action points which had been carried forward, and you'll see that Claire's introduced that. So I'm not proposing, unless you want to have a discussion about that, but if you think there's anything missing on there that you would like Sarah to add, then please submit that so we can keep that tracker updated. I think at the moment everything's so relatively recent, we don't need to particularly look at it today unless you feel we should have a conversation about it. But I just want to make sure you're aware that is something new we've added to the meeting, to the committee meeting structure. In terms of actually looking at the work programme, we've got 2 meetings coming up. The next one is November the 23rd, yeah, 23rd of November, which is the first of the meetings actually is purely improvement plan based. And then the next one is the 7th of December. which will be more in line with our regular work programme. For the 23rd, we've been building a list of things that could come to that. We've got at the moment several items. One is the IRO report that we said we would have had earlier. The other one is looking at the exit interviews. You may remember that was raised in council last week, whether exit interviews would be properly conducted. We undertook to agree that we would look at that at some point with scrutiny. That seems to be a good point to do that. And the other thing that we said we would look at is the carers panel, how that's working, and there's still quite a lot of mystery about that. So the aim would be to get a report on the carers panel and the IROs. Suggestion from Jenny and myself is that we have a workshop between now and when we have to set the agenda next. And the agenda, I think, has to be set by, is it the 19th of November? Sarah?
It will need to be, for the 23rd, it will need to be published by the 15th.
15th, right, yeah. So sometime between the 28th of October, when Cabinet will approve the improvement plan, when we've been on the leadership essentials course, and the date for the publication of the agenda, suggestion is that we have maybe a couple of hour workshop, an hour each on the IRO report and on the carers panel, so we get the information that we need in order to then properly scrutinise at the meeting in November. Now, there may be some other things that might come up after the 28th of the improvement board, the improvement panel, whatever that's going to be, whatever the improvement process is going to be. There might be some things that come out of that we want to include in the November meeting, and we've always said that our meetings will be fairly flexible to include things that are urgent. And I know that Chief Exec's quite keen on making sure we do pick up things that come out that need a fairly quick review. But at the moment, that's the way I think it could be the basis of the November meeting.
You're talking about the 23rd?
Yeah, 23rd, yeah. 23rd
So
is the meeting.
That's the improvement focus.
Improvement panel, improvement process focus, yes. Improvement plan focus. But now we have a workshop between now and then between us two.
What date is the workshop?
We haven't agreed that. That's all.
I haven't got.
No, we've got to agree that. That's our outline. Any questions or thoughts on that?
I need to know how quickly we can get evidence for the two items. What was it? The IRO
and the carers panel.
And the carers portal. Yeah.
Just to let you know.
Is there anybody who can give an answer to that? Because if we're going to do a workshop, actually the time the schedule is pretty tight, isn't it? Between now and the 23rd of November.
If I can take the action to convey an update, obviously you'll appreciate day 2 in this new role for me. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I'll come back to you straight away on that in terms of what the current status is.
So we'll get back with dates about a workshop so we can understand the IRO issue. Get back to committee members as soon as we have now.
Do committee members agree that having a workshop together between those two dates would make sense to cover both those issues? And we've had them in here before. I think it's really valuable. They work well. That's why I propose again. Before we do more, Councillor Kenny, I can see you again.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little reluctant. You seem to be riding Free Willy with our time. And again, you know, we do this role, but you'll say in this meeting, that meeting, I'm just kind of a little bit concerned about too many meetings and not enough going on in them. I had my hand up to make a suggestion for the work programme. Can I do that now, Chairman?
You can, yes. That's what this is about.
Right. Okay. I'd like to public health in because I'd like to know the take up of children with the where we are as Herefordshire, what advice is being put out, what we're doing with our looked after children, whether they're what decisions being made, whether we take the decision or the foster carers take the decision. That'd be something I'd like to know about. I'd also like from public health to know about our levels of obesity and how many teeth they're pulling out of rotten teeth they're pulling out of young children. So those are a few of the things, and also what benefit the free swimming and the like has had on young children, whether it's been taken up, the offer from Halo for families, free swimming. So there's some of the questions I'd like asked, and perhaps public health can be asked to come along and comment on those.
That's in December.
Yeah, just a couple of points. We agreed at the very first meeting that it was going to be quite a challenging 2 years for scrutiny, and that we would be effectively double the number of meetings. Instead of them every 2 months, we'd have alternate between those specific improvement panel meetings. So we've already agreed, yes, it is quite a significant burden on all members of the committee, but given the requirement, we did have that discussion early on, and we agreed it wouldn't be more. The workshops, we've had several, and we do see them as a discussion with Claire, as an important part of training. So instead of having training on particular topics, then a workshop would help us to understand some of the key issues more thoroughly. So it would effectively be part of training, as well as actually discussing in some detail what we then bring to scrutiny, and it would enable officers to produce reports for us to scrutinise. And that's the other question, that we have to give officers the time to produce the reports for us to then scrutinise. And we already had conversations with Charmaine about the carers panel, that she's already started to do some work to produce a report we could bring to a workshop. So yes, we agree, it's going to be a lot more work for scrutiny, but we did accept early on that we'd probably be doing twice as much work for scrutiny what we're doing, because of the need to effect the improvement work as well as our regular work which we have to do. We are looking at whether we need to do all the regular work that is listed, because some of the reports don't necessarily have to come to a meeting like this, which I'm sure you'd approve. And we've already started to look at that with Claire, taking advice on whether legally it should come to scrutiny or whether it can be done not coming to a meeting like this to save us some of that time. So hopefully that might save some of it.
Chairman, I completely agree. And for the first hour and a half of this meeting, we discussed something that we really didn't need to talk about. And I know I'm banging it home, but if you're expecting me to come in more and spend more time doing scrutiny, I want to have things that we can actually scrutinise and get facts and figures about. So it needs to be focused. So perhaps once you finish your training, you'll be able to focus better, and it'll take us all with us, because at the minute, I'm not feeling it.
No, that's quite right. And I think we've all felt a bit at a loose end, because we want to do more improvement plan work, and it hasn't been possible yet. So it's been a bit frustrating that we haven't had a clear focus on our work programme, because of the last couple of meetings we said, well, we need to wait until the improvement plan is actually approved. So we've been sort of not making them up, but producing agendas as we go along to reflect the fact we haven't actually been given a clear focus yet, because we don't know what elements of the improvement plan we'll be looking at. But coming back to what Councillor Hans was going to say, if you look at the December meeting, in the agenda items list that we've been sent to by Sarah, which is I think it's a PowerPoint presentation in Sarah, for December, we've already got public health, dental health and childhood obesity, and we've got health and wellbeing to include mental health in schools. And the other thing was holiday activities provided by schools during COVID. Those are the ones suggested for the December meeting at the moment. Partly covers what you were saying, I think. Councillor Kenyon.
Can I add something? I mean, the other point about having in between workshops, especially for something like the carers portal, is that it's likely to have sensitive information that can't be held in the public domain, but also gives us looking at what the information is there, gives us some strategic things that we can talk about in the public domain. So, but in order to talk about those strategic issues, we need to understand the more sensitive issues that underpin it. So we need to be careful with what's coming in by the carers portal, but we also need to be able to say, well, it is or it isn't working, what we might suggest so that it does work better. The IRO is a little bit different, but I think lots of us don't really know how the IROs work in other authorities, and maybe that one we could have in the public domain. It's less sort of sensitive in relation to what their function is, and that's a discussion we can have.
Sorry, thank you. I'll let you come move forward. Sorry, Al.
Thanks, Chair. So certainly the IRO report's a standard annual report, and there's no reason why that wouldn't be in the public domain. Can I suggest also that you do have performance challenge workshops, and some of the points that Councillor Kenyon was raising in terms of dental checks, obesity and the like, you might in order to reduce the burden on some of your other meetings, do a themed approach to some of the performance challenges and invite public health and other and CCG and others to provide a workshop and a performance data that we can challenge through that forum as well.
In fact, we already made comment on the challenge performance meetings up there. Too much focus on the stuff that's working and not enough on the things that actually you'd like us to look at.
Exactly.
So we've already made the point that we'd like those to be skewed the other way. So these things are going well, but these are the arguments and things we really need looking at. Scrutiny, can you take those on board? And this is a priority order we'd like to look at. We've already made those points. So it'd be great if we could make the challenge performance meetings more about the areas that we should scrutinise, not just tell us lots of things that are working okay.
And recognising the points that you've made around the learning and development journey that the scrutiny committee is on, as well as the service. We might be able to help you in the sense of if you in your forward plan were clear what items are ready for member development and member information, then we can provide those as briefing notes rather than perhaps as scrutiny agenda items. So we can provide briefing notes, they still be attached to the agenda, not necessarily for discussion, but for information. And then at a later date, if there was a further discussion, we could come back for a scrutiny item. I think we're talking at times about information and development, and we can provide briefing notes on those, and then others, which is actually a scrutiny function.
That's exactly the sort of thing that we would like to see, and that would answer Councillor Kennedy's question. What are the things that we get a briefing note on, that we should hear about, but don't need to discuss in committee unless we decide actually there is? But a lot of the work can be done through types of briefing notes that we just note, but don't necessarily act upon, as I say, unless there's something that comes out of them. That would mean we have less meetings, would be more effective and more focused. That would be good, a good development. Yeah, thank you. So in terms of recommendations for today, we recommended that for the November agenda, we currently say we're looking at IRO report, we're looking at carers panel, and we're looking at exit interviews potentially. But then the December one, it's back to a structured agenda, which will look at, I think they satisfied Councillor Kenyon's point, mental health and health and well-being. Whether you agree the holiday activities will be provided by schools, but we can agree that nearer the date. But as a plan at the moment, I think that is possibly a good suggestion that we can work to without having more detail available. And I think we should also know what Darryl just said about being able to get briefing notes from challenge performance meetings, which also focus more on the issues that need scrutiny as opposed to just what's working well. So we can pick up items on that as well for future work programmes.
Can I make a couple of suggestions? That the idea of having a workshop around the carers portal, that's, you know, well, nothing's obligatory, is it? But, you know, that isn't obligatory for all members to attend, that those members that want to attend that should let Philip and I know. And because from that meeting, we'll both digest enough information to ask some questions in public about that, how that carers portal is working.
I think that's a very good point. We know during the day, like Councillor Andrews, you can't attend, for example. But we've had, I think, 3 workshops now, and there's been from 3 to 4 councillors aboard, and they've all been very productive. Like one was the terms of reference for the CSO report, and we've submitted those and we're waiting a decision on it. But that was a very effective workshop that we were able to produce a very distinct document which we sent in, and hopefully will be, but is being considered. So they do have a good output. But what I suggested, we will send you some suggested dates when we can hopefully get some IRO officers in to come and talk to us as well, and then those councillors can attend, so we can do a report on that, and then make sure the next meeting is structured around what we learned. That makes sense? So a lot of exciting feedback on that. Does that look like a way forward that you want to buy into?
Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Kenyon, see your hands up again. And Councillor Summers.
So you just moved me as I was about to unmute. Can you hear me okay?
You're fine.
Yeah, okay. Just a quick one. I have asked this question various different people, but I just realised that, well, I didn't realise there's issues there all the time, that Kate from the legal department's been listening the whole way through. and I've got a bit of a, perhaps could we have an information update from Kate, if not today, but in the November or December, because I would like to know if we have got enough legal team support to support the children's services. A legal team is under pressure, as I understand, but it'd be interesting. We need to know things like that as a scrutiny committee, I believe, because if they haven't got the resources to do the job, or they haven't got, as in people, or even funding, I think we need to know, because we can raise that in scrutiny and ask for additional funding or ask for additional staff. So could that be a informal update, or could Kate do something now? Thank you, Chairman.
You want to respond to that, Kate, before we make any other comment?
Yes, I can respond now. We can. There were two things I wanted to raise anyway. One thing I wanted to raise anyway about the 23rd. We were due, Chair, to bring you 2 reports back. One which was on HRA training for social workers, and one which was on induction pack for new starters, and an update on our improvement plan in children's legal. So I wanted to know whether you wanted me to bring written reports back, or actually bring the team back to talk to those on that day. And to answer Councillor Kenyon's question, we brought an improvement plan and our structure to scrutiny previously, Councillor Kenyon, and I don't know if you've seen that. We do have a children's team that is resourced, and we are regularly reviewing that in the light of the cases that we get in. We have also received additional funding that was referred to for council last week as part of the improvement journey to enable us to recruit additional people and additional resources. And actually, I would welcome the opportunity to introduce Ruth Whittington, who who's watching Zoom today, and she's our new additional head of law for children's, and will be focusing on the improvement plan. And so at the moment, we do have the right resourcing in children's legal, but it does change depending on the extent of the cases that we are advising on, and the type of cases we're advising on. But as I've said, we have at the moment got some additional funding from the improvement plan, which has enabled us to bring in additional expertise.
Okay, actually surprising me, I didn't know you had those items down in your mind for the agenda on November, so that's quite interesting. I would suggest that by the nature of what you said, they could be exactly the sort of briefing guide that Darryl raised, presented to that meeting, so we can read them, and then if we feel we need to back to scrutiny at the time, that would probably be an ideal way of introducing them.
That would be most helpful, Chair, because our days are, like everybody else, is busy. So that would be most helpful. Thank you.
Right, I'll note those in the minutes. And Councillor Kenyon, yes, we quite agree with you about what we should scrutinise, and we note that that was one of the Ofsted report, that resources is an issue. And in the conversation which Councillor Hewitt and I have had in our weekly briefing with the Chief Executive, we've already agreed that one of the ways in which scrutiny can help is by looking at the resource that we have, not just in legal, but in the social workers, for example. Because one of the problems about in the past, there will be able to deliver on service, but we have enough people. What we need to reverse that around and say, how many people do we need to deliver on the plan? Have we got them? And if not, how do we find them? So that's already been raised as an area that, yes, once we get the improvement plan, then we think that's the sort of issue we'll be raising as something we should scrutinise. Councillor Summers, before I do that,
yes.
And I was going to say something and to say welcome and thanks for joining us. I don't know if you want to say a few words or just note that you're there, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I didn't hear that. No, thank you. I'm just observing today. I'm on week 2 of my time at Herefordshire.
Thank you. We knew you were there and appreciated the fact you were there too. Hope you've learned something, and we look forward to working with you. Thanks a lot. Councillor Summers, you already hand up.
Yeah, I should mention that Claire came to scrutiny and gave us all this information, I believe 2 weeks ago, and she was actually very knowledgeable about it. And so we did learn quite a bit that time. So from what I understand, it's completely taken care of. As far as dental health and obesity, we've almost done it to death, quite frankly. If we go back maybe 2 years, we've done dental health, we've had the dental NHS in, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure what the results of those were. I think we're going back on this stuff. We do these things and there's no results and we don't follow up. So perhaps before we do dental health and obesity, we should look back on records and see what we've already got and see what's already been through scrutiny, because there's been quite a bit, but very little happens with it. When it comes to dentistry, the issue back then was that NHS dentists were not taking new patients quite often, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought this was being really investigated, but I guess it all fell apart again. So yes, we need dental health, we need obesity, but we need to find out what we've already done and make sure that's being attended to. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah, and for your information, the reason it's on, we did look at this last year in scrutiny, and it was agreed that it needs to be reviewed, so at some point in the future, whether it's November or December or later, it needs to come back, or at least we need to review it. In fact, you might be right, maybe listening to the process of assessing whether scrutiny we talked about is something we should do. But at the moment, it's in the work programme because it was agreed it should be reviewed again at a time which is now approaching.
Can we get what's already been done with it and see what has been done with that information that was brought to scrutiny a year ago or 2 years?
There should be a report back on that. Yeah, can we note that, Sarah, to send to members? Yep, okay.
Thank you.
A steer to whether we should actually be looking at it, is that or not? So I think we've got four recommendations, one an outline for an October programme at the meeting, one an outline for the the December. Let me start again. We've got an outline for the November meeting, which is on the improvement plan. We've got an outline for the December meeting, which is a regular scrutiny work, both of which could be changed, but we've got suggestions of what could be on there, particularly for the November one. And we've agreed that we will take into account the challenge performance meetings in order to give us feedback on what we should be scrutinising. Anything else anyone wants to add? Agree? Those are recommendations we can go forward with. All those in, can we have a proposal? We do that, please. Councillor Hanson, seconder. Councillor Fagan, all in favour? Okay, that's agreed. I think that ends the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. And we finished 2 minutes short of 5:30, which is the 3 hours in which we are supposed to finish. Despite the long conversation, we still finished in the time period allowed to us. Thank you all very much, really appreciate it. Can I confirm that the next date of next meetings we need to just confirm? I think we know those. The 23rd of November is the next meeting, and the one for that is the 7th of December. Can I confirm that the recording is turned on, please?